The Fate of Austria. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1. The King from Another World. 1834, Austrian Empire, Vienna. Point with blue skies and clear river water. This is a livable city, but it doesn't look like the capital of a powerful country in the 19th century. Point the relatively gloomy sky, accompanied by severe smog and black rivers, although not environmentally friendly, are definitely a powerful symbol of a country in this era, such as London, England. Point inside a classic building with a Baroque exterior. The interior is designed in the Rococo period. The antique furniture on display is even more diverse, ranging from oriental porcelain to raw beeswax stones from the Baltic Sea. Point its owner was Francis II, the last monarch of the Holy Roman Empire and the first monarch of the Austrian Empire. Point Francis II was facing a choice at this time, a difficult choice. Choose a good successor, or stick to tradition. Point perhaps, because of being separated by a generation, Franz II has been doting on this special grandson. Since Franz was born, a healthy baby boy without any intellectual disability is his hope and the hope of this empire. Yes, the Austrian Empire at that time was indeed facing the problem of having no qualified heir, but today, the eldest grandson of Franz II was in the children's room. He took out 5 letters and made a combination that he couldn't ignore. A-I-O-U. Those are the words left by Frederick III in Stephen's Cathedral, which are still engraved on the shrine. Point at the same time, this was the only way Franz Joseph could think of to attract the attention of the old emperor. Austria is doomed, Francis II murmured. Point Frederick III was the last Holy Roman Emperor to be crowned by the Pope in Rome. However, he was not an excellent emperor. When facing the Hungarian invasion, his own strength was insufficient, his princes were passive and sabotaged, and his allies stopped to wait and see, so he had to hunt westward in a hurry. Point he wanted to carry out reforms and eliminate long-standing shortcomings, but he failed amidst the opposition of the great nobles. In the end, he had to live a solitary life, enjoying studying astrology and alchemy. Point why not Francis II? His grandmother, Empress Isa, was so dazzling that she overshadowed her successors. What is even more frightening is that the radical reforms of Joseph II, the previous emperor, and the subsequent shock therapy of Leopold II, the previous emperor, plunged the entire Austria into chaos. At the same time, Napoleon also appeared in France, an old enemy. Such a character in that era called Napoleonic. Francis II and the Holy Roman Empire, who opposed Napoleon, naturally became the background of the era. With the capital divided, he married his daughter to seek peace and dissolved the Holy Roman Empire. Point Francis II had too many unwillingnesses in his heart, but his legal heir, his eldest son Ferdinand, seemed unable to bear the burden of reviving the empire. His second son also had no ability to govern the country. Point however, the eldest grandson of Francis II was a special child. Although Franz Joseph behaved a bit strangely, he showed great intelligence since he was a child. It's just that Franz is too young, and there is no precedent in the Austrian Empire for an eldest grandson to inherit the throne over his eldest son. Point Francis II still remembered the War of Austrian Succession caused by the state edict. Point but on the other hand, there were some things that were deeply rooted in his soul that he could not forget for a long time. That is the dream of a powerful country, which is the dream of every emperor. Which emperor in this world doesn't want to expand his territory and make his country prosperous? Not to mention the emperor, even ordinary people hope to live in a powerful country. Who wants to live in a country where war is raging, people are in dire straits, and there are gunfights whenever they go out? But Franz II failed to do this and allowed the country to decline step by step. He also knew in his heart that he had no chance, so he could only place his hope on the next generation. Point the mentally retarded eldest son, or the autistic second son. They obviously don't have that ability, at least not better than themselves. Francis II really didn't want the declining Austria in front of him to be the pinnacle of the empire in the future. What Francis II didn't know was that the Austrian Empire in history had only experienced 3 monarchs, and it existed in name only after the Austro-Prussian War in 1866. It was replaced by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a doll empire, and fought in World War I. Then it completely disappeared in the long river of history. At this time, Franz Joseph, the eldest grandson, did not know how entangled Franz II was in his heart. His soul comes from later generations. Although there were neither computers nor mobile phones in the 19th century, he was born into a royal family and should be able to be a playboy. But he soon understood that the identity he obtained through time travel was the famous tragic emperor in history, Franz Joseph. His love affair with Princess Sissy is well known to the world. But his brothers, parents, children, and wife all died before him. His empire became the backdrop for the rise of Germany and France, and then completely collapsed in World War I. Franz Joseph's life can only be described as tragedy, but it is not enough. He was the last monarch of the Austrian Empire and the first monarch of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. 2 years after his death, the Austro-Hungarian Empire perished and was shattered into pieces. However, at this time, what worried Franz the most was not these, but the debt problem of this country and this family. The debt of more than 1 billion florins is indeed an exaggeration. At this time, the Austrian Imperial government's annual fiscal revenue was approximately 110 million florins, and its annual fiscal expenditures exceeded 100 million florins. According to this calculation, even if the debt does not accrue interest, it will take the Austrian Empire more than 100 years to repay the money. Franz felt sad. Fortunately, the current Franz Joseph was born early enough, but this body seems to be unable to do anything. All he could think of was trying his best to please the old emperor and attract his attention. After all, the old emperor held real power, unlike the later Ferdinand, whose decrees had to be approved by the Regency Council. If the old emperor is happy and rewards some manners and industries, then Franz will have startup capital. Coupled with his vision far ahead of the times, he will definitely make a lot of money. At least this is what Franz thinks. The reason why Franz is so eager is that the first time that will change the fate of the Austrian Empire is getting closer and closer. The German Zollverein was established in 1834, but the Austrian Empire refused to join, which sounded the death knell for the empire. On the other hand, Francis II, who was worried, decided to ask God. Of course, it's not really about going to heaven to ask God, but going to church to ask God's messenger. Since ancient times in the East, emperors have always liked to seek divination from immortals when they were in doubt. Even in modern times, people only read horoscopes for nothing, ask tarot for small things, and gossip about big things. As it was in the East, so it was in the West, and so Francis II appeared at the door of St. Stephen's Cathedral. Please invest and vote. Chapter 2. This is a revelation. Stephen's Cathedral is the largest church in Vienna and the place where the Austrian emperor was crowned and buried. It can be said to be a symbol of Vienna. At the same time, it is located in the center of the city center of Vienna, so it is called the heart of Vienna. The cathedral was built in 1304 and completed 2 centuries later. It has both Gothic style and Renaissance flavor. Outside the church, you can see the 230,000 pieces of colored glass on the roof. Under the sunlight, the colored glass that looks like a double-headed eagle is a masterpiece. When I opened the church door, I was greeted by the smell of staleness and dust, followed by the smell of resin and frankincense. Entering the cathedral, the light inside gradually dimmed, and only the candlelight on the shrine shone brightly. The temperature seemed to have dropped as well, making it feel peaceful and calm. There was a solemn and sacred atmosphere far away from the smoke of the world, and Franz II's heart seemed to calm down. When the emperor came in person, Prussia, as the Archbishop of Vienna, naturally had to welcome him personally. It's just that his fat body and exaggerated clothes are incompatible with this ancient and sacred church. Francis II was in a hurry this time, and did not wait for Archbishop Prussia, who always arrived late. He walked straight to the shrine, enshrined by his family, and stroked the ancient words engraved on the shrine with his fingers. Unexpectedly, Archbishop Prussia, who was usually slow, was extremely fast this time. In fact, as a bishop appointed and dismissed by the emperor, how could he neglect the emperor? Oh, praise the grace of Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, which brought the great King of Earth here. Franz II waved his hand. No more polite words. I'm just here to pay homage to my ancestors. Of course Archbishop Prussia could hear that there was something in this. Originally, as God spokesperson, he wanted to be reserved. But he suddenly remembered that His Majesty the Emperor was obsessed with face and had very little patience. Your Majesty, you can talk about anything in God's abode, point me. Franz II thought for a moment and decided to speak out. After all, he was a devout Catholic. In addition, the Archbishop of Vienna in front of him was appointed by him and was not an outsider. The most important reason is that this fat man will definitely speak according to his own needs, which sounds very nice. European monarchs will also use special first-person titles. When the Tsar calls himself, he will use plural first person to show the unique identity of the monarch. French monarchs will say je or nous. German monarchs will call themselves we, which is translated as that's what I meant. My grandson, little Franz, displayed the prophecy of Frederick III in the children's room today. What is that? Rorschach asked instinctively, and the next second he realized something was wrong. Isn't that what is written on the shrine he has been facing all day long? In order to cover up his embarrassment, he could only adopt a very indifferent attitude, as if nothing had happened. AIOU. Franz II blurted out, with a bit of pride in his tone, this is a revelation. The Archbishop immediately possessed the magic stick. Magic sticks are the same in ancient and modern times, both at home and abroad, and Rorschach is no exception. He likes to follow the Emperor's words, and he is a primitive man who has been looking for the so-called born saint his whole life. Archbishop, what do you mean? Franz II seemed a little excited, because he thought so too. It's a pity that he is not a hero. Even if he has ideas, he still wants to rely on gods and ghosts to support his ideas naturally. Rorschach would not miss this opportunity and send him a flattery. This is a good omen, indicating that the Austrian Empire's grand hegemony will surely be realized. Archbishop Rorschach looked confident, as if he had really received some revelation. In fact, if you analyze it carefully, there is no difference between saying this and not saying it. Although Archbishop Rorschach said that the Empire's hegemony would eventually be realized, he did not say when exactly or to what extent it would be accomplished. Therefore, strictly speaking, it was not a lie or a violation of doctrine. But this was undoubtedly a shot in the arm for the indecisive Franz II. Because this is not his idea, this is God's will. In short, something went wrong, and he didn't take the blame, and he immediately became happy. Rorschach has been able to stay in the position of Archbishop of Vienna for so many years, and he still has the ability to observe words and emotions. He thought to himself, the Emperor is not in the right state today. Is he planning to pass the throne to his grandson? Then, Rorschach thought of the state rescript and couldn't help but feel nervous. But then he thought of Queen Nissa, the prosperity of the Caesarea, and the strength of the church, and his mood calmed down again. Your Majesty, I have also met Archduke Franz. He is indeed a special child. I still remember that when I was baptizing him, he gave me a bad taste. Rorschach had a good impression of Franz, because Franz always held a Bible in his hand and couldn't put it down, so he must be a devout believer. In fact, Franz doesn't know much German yet. I like holding the Bible because the book is big enough for my feet and the cover is soft enough to be used as a seat cushion. Sometimes, as a member of the royal family, Franz had to put a few more books under his buttocks in order to maintain a dignified sitting posture. In addition, it can also be used to beat the younger brother, Maximilian. Maximilian is Franz's second brother. The two seem to have a natural incompatibility and are always fighting. Maximilian naturally couldn't defeat Franz, who had lived to live, but Franz couldn't really get into trouble with a child. Then Franz thought of a way to find a book that was thick and big enough, put it on Maximilian's back, and then sit on it himself, so that the dispute between the children could be resolved peacefully, and the book it just so happens to be the Bible. As a result, Maximilian was often pressed against his back by Franz with a Bible and could only move his hands and feet. That look was like a little tortoise being held in its shell. But what the Archbishop saw was a devout believer who never left his hand with the Bible. On the other hand, Archbishop Rorschach himself has always wanted to find a natural saint and restore people's trust in Catholicism. But after so many years of searching and countless failures, he made a decision. Instead of waiting for a saint to appear, create one yourself. Now that the old emperor is thinking about it, Rorschach will naturally not miss this opportunity. If this child is allowed to inherit the throne in the future, then he will become the emperor's godfather. At that time, his guarantee will be Richie Lu. He will have all the power during his lifetime, and after his death. Famous through the ages. Richie Lu, a famous cardinal in history. Your Majesty, you should follow your inner choice. Your choice is God's will. Naturally, Rorschach could not say what he wanted to do, so he could only leave the part to God. Archbishop, what do you want to say, Rorschach? Didn't expect that the always straight-tempered old emperor would say this. He really didn't even want to lose face and smiled awkwardly. May the Austrian Empire enjoy long-lasting peace and stability. The old emperor also smiled. He was not a wise king, but he would not be influenced by a magic stick. This was his pride as an emperor, although it was useless. Maybe. This is a revelation. Chapter 3 An Unreliable Family. In 1834, Franz was still a little baby. 4 years old. He could only stay bored in the royal children's room every day. Night was the hardest time, because an unreliable mother would come to put him to sleep. Mrs. Sophie felt that putting the child to sleep was fulfilling a mother's duty, so Franz couldn't sleep. The big rabbit is sick. The second rabbit looks at it. The third rabbit buys medicine. The fourth rabbit boils. The fifth rabbit dies. The sixth rabbit carries it. The seventh rabbit digs a hole. The eighth rabbit buries it. The ninth rabbit sits on the ground and cries. The 10th rabbit asks it why it is crying. 9 rabbits said. 5 rabbits will never come back once they leave. The weird lyrics make people think deeply, but the mother doesn't seem to care about the child's reaction. She still sings to herself, occasionally taking a breath, and still complaining in her heart. Why is the child still not sleeping? It wasn't that Franz didn't want to sleep, but the strange lyrics entered his brain and lingered in his mind, and he was too frightened to sleep. You must know that this is one of the top 10 scary nursery rhymes spread in later generations. Why did Mrs. Sophie choose this nursery rhyme? Finally, Franz came up with a way to tell a story, to coax Madame Sophie to sleep, and then asked the maid to take her away. Just as Franz took a deep breath, a man smelling of alcohol walked in. This wine smell is very distinctive. It is not just the taste of a certain kind of wine, but the taste of many kinds of wine mixed together. It was Franz's unreliable father who came. He also knew that he was different from normal people, so he would avoid other people when he came. Parents all over the world feel the same about caring about their children, whether they are relatives of the emperor or ordinary people. Ever since Franz's father came with a jug of wine. Franz's father only had 2 hobbies. One was drinking, and the other was hunting. He believes that wine is the best thing in the world, because when you are drunk, you will not be tired, and will not think of those unhappy things. Franz had not cried since he was born, so he felt that Franz must be depressed, and he felt that Franz must need to be released. He also remembered what his father once said, good things should be shared with your family, so today he took his 10 favorite wines, mixed them together, and went to the children's room. I thought of sharing my favorite wine with my eldest son, so that he could grow up quickly. After all, drinking wine alone is not fun. He poured Franz a drink, poured himself another, and smiled. Franz's head was full of black lines, and he couldn't help but wonder how the original owner lived to such an old age. Then he walked to the door, opened it, called the maid over, and whispered a few words. Then the maid, Mrs. Morsha, screamed, and soon a large group of royal guards and doctors rushed in and took Franz's unreliable father away. Hofburg Palace, Hall of Mirrors. Francis II was taking a nap on the throne. He liked this room, as if he could relive the glory of the Habsburg family. Yesterday's conversation in St. Stephen's Cathedral, any other revelation, and those unreliable plans have been forgotten by him. He prefers enjoying the comfort brought by the afternoon sun to those risky moves. Francis II had never been a brave man. His brother once carried out drastic military reforms, which revitalized the Austrian army, and also offended some vested interests. He did not withstand the pressure, and dismissed Archduke Karol, whom Napoleon called his most powerful opponent. The result is that to this day, those military problems of the last century still plague the Austrian Empire. Franz II knew very well that Austria's influence at home and abroad was declining, but heavy debts and an intricate network of interests made all reforms stretched, and every time the good was pressed, the good floated. Then, he remembered again that he should have listened to the advice of his other brother. Archduke John, to carry out economic reforms and cancel domestic tariffs to suppress the powerful. At that time, Napoleon was invading, and the local powerful factions were severely weakened. With the country united as one, it was a good time for reform, but he did not adopt it. There is also the recently established German customs union, which Austria should also join. This is a Prussian conspiracy. We must do something. There can only be one giant in the German Confederation. Once Prussia takes control of the Zollverein, their development will be unstoppable. At that time, the entire hall was noisy, and every minister was gearing up, as if they were planning to fight. Before giving up, both Finance Minister Korolev, Prime Minister Metternich, and the overestimating Baron Bruck all approached Francis II, and stated the pros and cons of joining the German customs union, and strongly recommended that the empire join. Exclusion from the German Zollverein would significantly reduce Austria's influence. However, the nobles in the country were opposed, such as Prince Windigoritz, Princess Esterhazy, etc. Franz II felt that he could not ignore these voices, and he had no choice. There was no way that Franz II couldn't help but smile to himself, with a bit of sadness in it. He felt less like a supreme monarch, and more like an old widower being led around by family chores. Today is the day that the German Zollverein, led by Prussia, was officially established. An 8-year tariff agreement will become the basis for the disintegration of Austria's influence in the future. In front of the palace, Prime Minister Metternich, Finance Minister Korolev, and Baron Bruck, three people with different political views and almost no contact with each other until death, rarely reached agreement on one thing: Austria must join the German customs union. Baron Bruck, who has always been upright, was the first to speak. He never liked to show off and firmly believed that everything he did was for the country. Finance Minister Korolev hates the man in front of him, because Baron Bruck always likes to talk about doing it for the country and the people. Korolev is completely different. He never hides his greed for money and power. He believes that those who refuse to talk about interests are all hypocrites, or they are a cover-up used by those with vested interests in a certain field to protect their own interests. These hypocrites are often scarier and dirtier than those who are greedy for money and power. Austria does not want to join the German Zollverein, but to lead it. Prussia does not deserve to lead the German Zollverein. Germany is the dumping ground for our goods and the origin of our raw materials. Austria does not have a colony of its own. This is unacceptable. Germany is our first colony. After Korolev finished speaking, he looked at Baron Bruck provocatively. What? You are thinking, I will say it for you. I heard from the doctor that holding it in is not good for your health. Don't thank me. Korolev laughed up to the sky and walked towards the palace gate. Baron Bruck sneered at Korolev's behavior and said something disdainful. Madman. Then he strode into the palace gate. Chapter 4. 2 or 3 attempts to form the German customs union. Metternich, who was lagging behind, looked at his two colleagues and sighed. Although these people are full of confidence, based on his understanding of the old emperor, they will probably not succeed this time. But as an idealist, he is not willing to give up, even if there is little hope. Metternich liked the title Prime Minister of Europe very much. It was only after he became the Prime Minister of the Austrian Empire that he discovered that directing the country was not as easy as he thought. In the past, as a diplomat, no matter how many people besieged or slandered him, he could deftly resolve it with words. However, as the Prime Minister of the Empire, he had no money. He could not even hire a clerk, and his decrees could not leave Vienna, let alone reforms. Austria's domestic relations are more complicated than the situation in Europe. Joining the German customs union would obviously benefit the Austrian Empire without any harm. But he encountered strong opposition, which was far more intense than he imagined. Because the removal of tariffs will affect the income of some people, the entry of goods from the German region into Austria will affect the profits of some people, and even the increase in the German population in Austria will also affect the status of some people. Emperor Franz II was also soft-hearted and afraid of taking responsibility. so the final result is most likely to do nothing and maintain the status quo. Metternich knew very well that, if he wanted to maintain Austria's position as chairman of the German Confederation, he must either join the German Zollverein or prevent its establishment. He tried the latter, but failed. Led by Prussia, 6 North German states established a customs union in 1826. And tariffs among the participating states were abolished. The following year, the 2 large southern German states, Bavaria and Württemberg, formed the South German Customs Union. Later, some other southern German states also joined in response to the customs union organized by Prussia. In 1828, the states of Hanover, Saxony, Thuringia and the cities of the Hanseatic League formed the Sino-German Customs Union against Prussia. But who would have trouble with the money bag? So these organizations established to fight Prussia fell apart and eventually became the cornerstone of the German Zollverein. The establishment of the German Customs Union was good news for Prussia, and it was also good news for Austria. Although Austrian products were not comparable to those of Britain and France at this time, and were not even as good as Belgian products, he was still very confident compared with Prussia. As long as the German Customs Union is mastered, it will not only alleviate Austria's economic constraints, but also strengthen its control over the German Federation, thereby reviving the glory of a great power. As long as he has money, Metternich can carry out reforms and realize his ambitions. On the other side, Prince Wintergoratz and other dignitaries also arrived in front of the palace. Their trip had only one purpose, which was to prevent Austria from joining the German Customs Union. Because Bohemia is close to South Germany and Saxony, if tariffs are exempted, it will greatly affect the income of local noble officials. Prince Esterhazy even came from Hungary with his people overnight. He came not because of money. In his opinion, doing business with Prussia would also make it easier for him to buy Prussian luxury goods, amber agate, pearls, with less money. However, once Austria and Germany establish closer relations, the German population in Austria will increase, which will most likely affect the power of the Hungarian nobles within the empire, which he and they cannot tolerate. Borstrow, a banker and in fact a representative of the Rothschild family, objected on the grounds that Solomon Rothschild wanted to monopolize the banking business of the Austrian Empire forever. Now within the Austrian Empire, several well-known banking families have declined or are in a state of shock due to the delay in collecting the empire's debts. Once restrictions are lifted, North German banks will enter the Austrian Empire, thus affecting the family's interests in Vienna. In the Hall of Mirrors, a fierce quarrel broke out again. On the side that supported joining the German Zollverein, both Metternich, Korolaf and Bruck were experts in their own fields. This made the debate unsuspicious from the beginning. It seems like it should be but can the right and well-founded side win? Presenting facts and reasoning are obviously not what these noblemen are good at. Fishing in troubled waters and playing palace politics are what they are good at. The staff they hired with huge sums of money were not just for a living. In particular, the great nobles seized on Metternich and tried to establish a German customs union with Austria as a core, but the result was that they broke up unhappy. Your Excellency, have you forgotten how we broke up with Saxony on bad terms that time, and how Bavaria betrayed its trust? Yes, even Baden and Württemberg are at odds with us because of this. Have you forgotten? Another nobleman echoed. At this time, Metternich remembered how these powerful people were so clever that the alliance explained. Because Saxony's industrial products compete with Austria, and crops from Prussia may enter Hungary through Saxony, which will affect their interests. In order to prevent trade between the Austrian Empire and Saxony, the opponents even bribed officials to prevent the Saxon mission from entering. Finally, the Saxon mission had to enter Austria via Bavaria. At the meeting, these nobles put forward harsh conditions and even asked the Saxon government to limit the quantity and type of goods exported to Austria, causing the Saxon ambassador to leave the meeting angrily. After that, he bribed the ministers around the King of Saxony and spread false news that Austria intends to make Saxony a vassal. At this time, King Anton of Saxony still claimed to be the master of the most powerful state in North Germany. He dreamed of annexing Prussia sooner or later and then fighting Austria. How could he accept the humiliation of surrendering to Austria? As a result, the commercial alliance between Austria and Saxony collapsed. The three southern German countries are more similar to Austria in culture and religion, and are strongly liberal. They are very interested in things that can make money. There are even many big Germans who consider themselves subjects of the Holy Roman Empire. The churches in the three southern German countries also hope to use this to close relations with Austria, to resist the influence of North German Protestants. The Austrian churches also hope to use this to enhance the influence of the Catholic Church, to fight against the increasing Protestant influence in the country. With Metternich's ingenious combination, the attitudes of the church, the people, and the bureaucrats were unprecedentedly consistent. This was already the general trend, but the great nobles were unwilling to give in. The great nobles tried their old tricks at first, planning to make things difficult for the envoy. However, this time Metternich learned wisely, and found a general who was both a noble and incompatible with the aristocratic circle, Julius Caesar, to receive the envoy. This man is the illegitimate son of the Hessian candidate, and has no inheritance rights. He should not be a noble. However, he came to Austria alone during the Napoleonic Wars, performed well on the battlefield, and received a knighthood in the Austrian Empire. Genuine nobles despise such illegitimate children with wild backgrounds. At the same time, Hainaut also looks down on those so-called nobles, who rely on the shelter of their ancestors and wet their pants whenever they fight. At the same time, Hainaut also had another identity, which made the nobles even more disgusted. He is a Jew, and his mother is the daughter of a Jewish businessman. She first married a blacksmith, and then became unwilling to be lonely, and became the lover of the Grand Duke of Hesse, secretly giving birth to Hainaut. People like Hainaut are unacceptable to the great nobles, and Hainaut's evil reputation makes all those who try to cause trouble shun away. Only this time, the nobles went even further. Their behavior can no longer be said to be harming the country. It is simply traitorous. This time they went directly to the French. Chapter 5. 2 or 3 attempts to form the German customs union. Time goes back to before the nobles came to find the French. Because of the existence of Hainaut, the nobles could not take action directly. After all, no one wants to try it. This mad dog's knife may be useful or not. As a result, the great nobles repeated their old tricks and promoted Austria's ambitions for the three southern German countries. The three kings of South Germany showed no concern, and officials began to ask whether they could retain their official positions and salaries. After joining Austria. The three southern German countries of Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden chose to lie down out of helplessness. France was not much weakened after the Napoleonic Wars. The situation between the two lands of France and Austria has not been broken. On the contrary, the Napoleonic Wars caused great damage to the rule of the three southern German countries. Although the three southern German countries were the victorious countries, instead of strengthening, their strength suffered a huge decline. Coupled with Prussia's acquisition of the Rhineland, this evil wolf's sense of oppression over South Germany was increasing day by day. At this time, the three southern German countries neither had access to the sea, nor were they agricultural countries. If you want to develop yourself, you can only rely on the powerful countries around you that are eyeing you. It is never easy to seek skin from a tiger. Austria once used them as a bulwark against France, the French used them as gunmen, and their expedition to Russia almost drained the three South German countries and destroyed tens of thousands of troops in the ice and snow of Russia. The Prussians supported them just to let them weaken Austria. As for the cost, you can understand it. The domestic people, the aristocracy, and even the capitalists have long been dissatisfied with this incompetent government. Everyone wants to change the status quo and have a strong state to protect their lives and property. A unified country and a unified market are their most urgent needs. This is why South Germany has become the main gathering place for the greater German faction. The Habsburg family was once the royal family of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Austrian Empire is now the chairman of the German Confederation. The fastest way to unify Germany seems to be to rely on the authority of Austria and the Habsburg family. On the other hand, the reputation of the Habsburg family is pretty good, and the status and property of the nobles can be guaranteed, and they can even get a good compensation. This is quite tempting for those nobles with serious overall financial deficits. Wouldn't it be nice to take advantage of the change of power to kill a group of creditors. Austrian law stipulates that officials must understand German. This is a great thing for officials and young talents from the 3 southern German countries. A bigger country means more jobs after all. The number of Austria's main ethnic groups is very insufficient compared to its size. The conspiracies of the great nobles cannot succeed, so they can only rely on scheming, which is to play with public opinion. It's just that Menet was well prepared and went to Archbishop Prussia to explain the pros and cons before the negotiations. At the negotiation table, a group of church bishops came uninvited. Facing this group of magicians, the Austrian nobles could not stand up. After all, the only ones who could defeat the Kshatriyas were the Brahmins. Public opinion? Who said that public opinion is against joining the Germans? Alvarine, the Archbishop of Linz, said with some disdain. The aristocratic staff who were extremely arrogant just now were immediately turned into eggplants. Only one young man whispered, "This is the conclusion we reached after our investigation." Oh. The Archbishop of Linz couldn't help laughing. "Which diocese are you from, my child?" The surrounding bishops looked at each other and laughed. "It's just that the staff of these great nobles are not ridiculous." "The parish of Bohemia," answered the young man. "Okay, kid." Archbishop Lenz turned to Archbishop Paulslow. "Your Bohemian diocese should hold a vote and let the kids see the conclusion." At this time, the church still held considerable weight in the Austrian Empire. It might be difficult to get the parishioners to hand over their property and fight the enemy, but it could still be done in minutes by manipulating a vote. Well, who still objects now? "We accept the Catholic brothers in South Germany." Archbishop Prussia's words were even more explicit, and there was a lot of contempt in them. In this era, the relationship between the church and the nobility was not very good, especially those new aristocrats engaged in industry and commerce. Because they refused to pay tithes, and refused to pay tithes for their employees, especially after religious freedom was implemented in the Austrian Empire. The nobility and the church gradually parted ways. The church was dependent on the state, and the nobles wanted more power. Of course, there was both opposition and cooperation between the nobility and the church. Many bishops were from noble families, and many nobles would send their second sons and daughters who could not get good dowries to the church to avoid property division. And when it comes to manipulating public opinion, the nobles are really no match for the church. In the face of the church, no big noble is willing to come forward to seek such bad luck. The only way he can think of is to drag his feet. Metternich had already expected the procrastination tactics used by the great nobles, but he didn't think these nobles could do anything else. The most he can do is start a local uprising. He has ordered the Minister of War, Count Latter, to pay close attention to domestic trends. However, Metternich still underestimated the lower limit of this group of great nobles. Soon after, a letter and 200,000 francs were placed on the desk of French cabinet minister Guizot. "Dear Monsignor Guizot, the great France is suffering from a shameless conspiracy, and the despicable Germans are preparing to unite against the great French Empire. The evil Prince Metternich intends to use an alliance to gradually annex the 3 southern German countries. Once the German conspiracy succeeds, the balance of power in Europe will inevitably be broken. The haze of war will once again cover the sky of Europe for freedom and peace. I hope you can save kind and innocent people from the baptism of war. Truly, peace-loving Europeans." The British also received similar letters, but before the British had time to react, the French took action first. Guizot immediately used Marshal Soult's order to send a note to the 3 South German countries, requiring the 3 South German countries not to join the customs union organized by Austria. Otherwise he would retain the power to use force to dissolve the alliance. The heads of the 3 South German countries immediately panicked and quickly recalled the envoys sent to Austria for negotiations. In response to France's note, the war faction headed by Count Latter, Minister of War, advocated immediately gathering troops and notifying the Holy Alliance countries to mobilize for war against France. The great nobles warned the emperor that the Austrian treasury was now empty and its troops were insufficient. "The most important thing is to go to war with the French. Austria will bear the brunt and will surely suffer huge losses. If you don't want the tragedy of the Napoleonic Wars to happen again, the best way is not to fight. You cowards. Do you think that, because you are a coward, the French can't see you? France is powerful, but have you forgotten who defeated it? Count Latter has a hot temper. As an anti-French man, as a veteran, what he couldn't stand the most was the increase in prestige of the French. Latter, you fool, you have no money. Do you want to go to the battlefield by yourself? Besides, just because of Bavaria, Baden, and Württemberg, we will shed the last drop of Austrian blood. Wendigoretz the prince retorted. Ferdinand, Prince Wendigoret's name. This is not for others. The French have bullied us at our doorstep. This is something no soldier can tolerate. The duty of a soldier is to obey and serve the country, not for your bullshit dignity. The two sides were at war with each other, and Francis II was wavering in the middle. To be honest, he was very disgusted with France, but the Napoleonic War brought him too many bad memories, and he was a little scared. At this time, bad news came. An uprising broke out in Bohemia. To protest against the entry of South German goods into Bohemia. The local garrison could not suppress the attack, and asked Vienna for help. Francis II decided to stop the formation of the South German Customs Union and use all his strength to suppress domestic rebellions after the emperor left. Count Latter glared at Prince Wendigoretz. How dare you? All discerning people know that Bohemia has 80,000 regular troops, which is enough to suppress an uprising. Chapter 6 Your Majesty governs the world with the nobles, not with the common people. Chapter 6 Your Majesty governs the world with the nobles, not with the common people. Back to reality. The quarrel in the Hall of Mirrors continues. Your Majesty governs the world with the nobles, not with the common people. As the ruling class of this country, the aristocracy is obviously in opposition to the ruled common people. As members of the ruling class, they hope that the emperor would consider the interests of the nobles first. At the same time, those who supported joining the German customs union, Prince Metternich, Count Korolaf, and Baron Bruck were also nobles, and even the emperor himself was it. Just that those who keep saying that they want to rule the world with the emperor do not represent the interests of the country and the ruling class, but their own interests. They have two purposes. One is to block the transition between the small nobles and the common people. The other is to use the power in their hands, to collude with domestic and foreign forces, to squeeze the people of their country to the maximum extent. To sum up the attributes of this group of people simply, they are bureaucrats, landlords, and compradors. Although it was said by a group of villains with selfish intentions, it sounded harmless at the time. At this time, Austria was no longer the Holy Roman Empire divided into states. As Emperor of Austria, Francis II had absolute power. All this is thanks to the end of the Holy Roman Empire. Napoleon. The Napoleonic Wars greatly weakened the power of the local nobility, but inadvertently strengthened the centralization of power in Austria. In the past, the situation where small nobles dared to support their own troops and openly resist the state machinery has disappeared. Even the power of the great nobles was greatly restricted. Take Archduke Karol, the largest landed aristocrat in the Austrian Empire, as an example. He only had 1,000 private soldiers, and was unable to face the powerful army of the Austrian Empire. Other nobles have no ability to fight against the country. So now, if any big nobleman jumps out and says that the emperor refuses, I will go against it. Then Count Latter will definitely be happy to give him a ride. At this moment, a small figure slipped in from the door. The royal guard saw it, but did not stop him. After all, he was just a child. After all, he was the emperor's favorite grandson and the future master of this country. The upright Baron Bruck said, you going to govern this country with His Majesty? You only care about your own interests. Do you know how much benefits open trade can bring to this country? Our national finances have been on the verge of bankruptcy. As long as there is any disturbance, this building will collapse. You are an alarmist. Vienna has the largest number of banks in the world. Vienna had the largest number of private banks in the world at that time, but they were very small and most of them were in a half-dead state. They could not be compared with London at all. But who will lend us money? You. Now Vienna's financial industry is almost monopolized, and the country even has to mortgage part of its tariffs and public power to bankers. Can't you see? It is natural to pay back debts. Besides, are banks in other countries willing to lend you money? Don't make so many excuses, and look for reasons within yourself. Baron Bruck has worked hard all his life, with integrity and outstanding ability. Historically, he committed suicide because he was falsely accused and could not prove himself. It can be said that it is a miracle that Austria's finances have not collapsed today. He absolutely cannot accept the accusations from others. Do you know what the empire's financial revenue was last year? Baron Brooke asked angrily before the other party could answer. Baron Brooke continued, 130,269,877 florins. Do you know the total debt of the empire? 1,461,224,893 florins. Do you know the total interest that the empire had to pay to extend its debt last year? 101,221,096 florins. You don't know. Baron Brooke roared. So what? God bless our emperor. Austria will last forever. Do you think this is all your fault? The speaker was Petru, Prince Althaz's staff. He wasn't nervous and even retorted. This man graduated from the University of Vienna with excellent grades and once aspired to be a judge. But after waiting for 5 years in Vienna, the real gap was not filled. Finally, under the recommendation of a classmate, he became a staff member of Prince Althaz's family. Since becoming Prince Althaz's staff, his financial situation has improved. But he also saw more of the dark side of this society. It turned out that it was not that he was not good enough, but that he had no way out. Those teachers who kept teaching him to abide by the law actually colluded with the officials behind their backs to sell their jobs and get titles. At this time, Austria had a conferral system, which meant that officials were directly awarded official positions by the emperor. But the prerequisite for being granted an official position is that you can meet the emperor or let the emperor know your existence. Prince Althaz is a great nobleman in Hungary, and even the emperor cannot easily touch him. Petru never hesitated to execute Prince Althaz's orders. What if the Austrian Empire fell? As long as Hungary is still there, and Prince Althaz is still there, we can give him everything he wants. When Petru saw Baron Brooke speechless, he once again added fuel to the fire. The empire's debts have not been paid off for so many years. Why don't you resign? Give your position to those who are capable. Baron Brooke was furious and wanted to continue his theory. Count Korolev stopped the furious Brooke. Although he didn't like this guy, there was no doubt about his ability. As Korolev, the finance minister, naturally no one understands how dire Austria's financial situation is better than him. There are usually only two ways to increase fiscal revenue. One is to increase revenue and the other is to reduce expenditure. He has gone to the extreme in terms of saving money. He even withholds military pay and royal annuities. He will never spend anything he can't. Even so, the remaining money is only about 10 million per year. He had to use about 10 million yuan to solve the debt problem of hundreds of millions of dong every year. He could not imagine the difficulty. But now Brooke has lost his mind and has been led astray by the opponent. 20 years. As long as I join the German Zollverein, I promise to pay off all the debts of the empire within 20 years. This is not an empty talk, but is calculated by all officials of the entire Austrian Ministry of Finance. According to their calculations, joining the German customs union will bring Austria an annual economic growth of 4%. Even so, it's an extremely substantial gain. Korolev glanced at Petru, who was still thinking about how to deal with it. Can you do it? Shut up if you can't. Count Korolev was very disgusted with people like Petru who only knew how to talk. Korolev scanned the room. Which of you can guarantee to pay off the empire's debts within 20 years? Let him be my chancellor. You're kidding. Why should we repay the debt owed by the empire? The nobles complained in their hearts. Besides, it's impossible to repay it. In the hearts of the powerful, the debt of the Austrian Empire has long been a black hole that cannot be filled. Since being reasonable isn't enough, let's be tough. Several nobles, headed by Prince Althaz, walk towards Francis II. Your Majesty governs the world with the nobles, not with the people. Do you want those mud-legged people to ride on our heads? Franz II hesitated a little. He really didn't know what to do. Seeing the commotion below, he didn't know who to listen to. My ministers seem to be thinking about the country, but who can guarantee that they have no selfish motives? These nobles may seem incompetent, but they are their own people. Seeing Francis II swaying, some people laughed. This was the moment they had been waiting for. As a result, they got closer and closer to Francis II, trying to use pressure to overwhelm the weak-willed emperor. Your Majesty, have you forgotten France's attitude? Someone finally spoke more and more excitedly, and walked forward, and pulled Franz II's sleeve. Franz also smiled. He had been waiting for this moment. Chapter 7. It's time to show real skills. Why are you bullying Grandpa? Franz cried and ran over. When Franz II saw his grandson running over, he subconsciously pushed away Prince Eltherzy. He touched his grandson's head and said, "What's wrong? Grandpa is the emperor. No one can bully me." Then, "Why are they surrounding you and grabbing your arm just now? I saw it all. They just want to bully you." I didn't mean it. Don't talk nonsense, you kid. He was used to being arrogant. How could he bear being framed for no reason? He said casually. Prince Eltherzy realized something was wrong and wanted to explain. Although Prince Metternich and Count Korolaf were shocked at first when they saw this, they were experienced veterans after all. What scene had they not seen before? "Eltherzy, find out who you are. How dare you talk to Archduke Franz like this?" Metternich's implication is, "Don't you, Eltherzy, take the royal family seriously." Count Korolaf was not as tactful as Metternich. He directly roared, "What are you going to do to the emperor? How dare you, Count?" Korolaf was more ruthless. He directly confirmed that Prince Eltherzy planned to harm the emperor. Although Archduke Franz is not the emperor now, who can guarantee that he will not be the emperor in a few decades? With the help of these two big guys, Franz saw that the time was right. He didn't need to say anything. He only had to do one thing, and that was cry. Emperor Franz II didn't pay much attention at first, thinking that Prince Eltherzy was too excited. But after the two old men exchanged fire, an unknown fire arose in the old emperor's heart, and Franz suddenly burst into tears. He finally couldn't restrain the anger in his heart, and threw the gold wine glass at him. Prince Eltherzy. If you want to say that someone is unlucky, his teeth will be clogged, even if he drinks water. Eltherzy blocked subconsciously, and the wine glass accidentally bounced back and hit Franz II on the forehead. Things are getting big. Seeing that the situation was not good, Eltherzy wanted to see if Franz II was injured. But Count Turel, the Minister of War, roared and rushed forward. "Your Majesty is injured. Protect your Majesty." Grand Duke Louis, who was standing next to Franz II, was the biological brother of Franz II. He was the commander of the Imperial army. Although he was not very bright, he was absolutely loyal to Franz I. The moment Franz II was hit by the wine glass, Archduke Louis stood beside Franz II. Hearing someone shouting "Protect your Majesty," he subconsciously drew his sword. The sword in Grand Duke Louis's hand is now the only weapon in the entire Hall of Mirrors. As soon as he drew his sword, the atmosphere in the entire Hall of Mirrors suddenly became tense. The royal guards all knew that the Grand Duke was not very smart, but the dignitaries in their entourage didn't know that, and they suddenly became confused. Grand Duke Louis saw Eltherzy rushing toward his brother, and immediately swung his sword. Grand Duke Louis just wanted to separate the two, but Eltherzy dodged in time and was not injured. But in the eyes of the people below, this scene is a different story. Because he did not trust the Germans, the entourage brought by Eltherzy this time, except for Petru, only understood Hungarian. So, when Eltherzy brought his entourage, their blood boiled immediately when they saw this scene. Kill the Emperor of Austria and take away his throne. This is a topic that is often discussed among Hungarian nobles. Although the big nobles take it as a joke, the small nobles who are the audience don't think so. Besides, as Eltherz's retainers, they only recognized Prince Eltherzy, not the Austrian Emperor. Eltherz's entourage prepared to rush to the throne and kill the old emperor. The royal guards in the Hall of Mirrors may not be as effective in combat, but their loyalty can be guaranteed. After all, many people have served the Habsburg family for several generations, or even more than a dozen generations. The entire Hall of Mirrors suddenly started to move, and Eltherz's followers rushed towards the emperor's throne like they were dying. The royal guards tried their best to block it, Some people blocked it in the middle of the royal road, and some people pounced directly on Elphas's guards. The captain of the Forbidden Army directly sounded the alarm that had not sounded for hundreds of years. Soon, the 800 Imperial guards who were on duty throughout the palace got the news and rushed towards the Hall of Mirrors. A bunch of purple fireworks exploded over the palace. Seeing this, the city defense army and the Vienna garrison officers immediately gathered their troops to prepare to support the palace. Point in the Hall of Mirrors, Elphas's followers had all been subdued. Count Tyrrell took the opportunity to knock Prince Windigoretz down and punched him twice. Prince Metternich hid behind a pillar and came out only when the chaos subsided. Count Korolaf, on the other hand, found a nobleman whom he disliked and beat him up. Only Baron Brook, an upright man, tried to stop Elphas's entourage, but was knocked down with a punch. The door was kicked open, and a large group of Imperial guards poured into the Hall of Mirrors, surrounding everyone. Elphas watched all this in disbelief. He couldn't believe his eyes. How could this happen? To be honest, Franz himself didn't expect it. He originally only planned to get Elphas, the leader of the opposition, out of the game. Unexpectedly, this time I was completely eliminated. Franz II rubbed the head that had been hit just now, his heart filled with panic and anger. Elphas, what else do you have to say? I didn't mean to. For God's sake, believe me. Francis II stood up, walked towards Elphas, who was lying on the ground, and took out the sword from the hands of Archduke Louis. Seeing this scene, Elphas's body was shrouded in fear. He kept walking backwards with his hands on the ground, repeating, "My ancestors have made contributions to the empire and shed blood for the empire." Franz II had no expression on his face and raised his sword. "I still have 3 million florins in the bank in Vienna." Francis II's sword stopped in front of Elphas. Elphas felt his body getting hot, and he was afraid he had to change his pants. Franz II took a deep breath. Elphas, who knew people unknown, mistakenly brought the assassin into the palace. In memory of his ancestors' merits, he was deceived again, and now he is deprived of his title and all his assets in Vienna are confiscated. Ordered him to return to Hungary immediately and not to set foot in Vienna in his lifetime. Francis II turned towards the throne and threw the sword in his hand to Grand Duke Louis. Grand Duke Louis put away his sword and then waved his hand at the Forbidden Army. Prince Elphas was dragged out by 2 Imperial guards. His eyes were dull, as if he had lost half his life. Elphas's family owned large tracts of land in Hungary, but most of his family's wealth was spent on property in Vienna. So it's not wrong to say that it took half of his life. Compared with Prince Elphas, his entourage was not so lucky. Because Petru was also brought by Elphas, he was brought out by the Forbidden Army. Petru thought that he might spend the rest of his life in prison, but he saw that one of the forbidden soldiers took out a hanging stick from the bag. He wanted to run away and scream, but his mouth was blocked with a rag. Petru only felt someone pulling him from behind, and the noose was put around his neck. The custodes behind him began to twist the noose on the other end of the noose. The noose was wound around and around, and Petru struggled violently due to lack of oxygen. He tried to hold the noose with both hands and tried to save himself, but the opponent was a veteran and did not give him a chance. Petru's feet stepped on the ground twice, and he stopped struggling. A total of 13 corpses were loaded onto special carriages and sent out of the palace in the evening. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 Fight. If you don't give in. Franz II returned to the throne and picked up Franz. No one in this world can bully the emperor. No one can bully me, and no one can bully you. Grandpa will teach you how to be an emperor today. I just bullied Prince Elphas, this unlucky guy. At this time, Franz II was in a good mood and felt that he was back to his old self, the one who was full of ambition and wanted to sweep France and sweep Europe. Where have we reached this point? Francis II asked awkwardly. Join the German customs union. Metternich reminded in a low voice. When Korolaf heard this, he was like, "Good guy." He shouted in his heart, "Good guy." This was simply misleading the emperor. So he said, Prussia has already joined the German customs union ahead of us. As the chairman of the German Confederation, our Austrian Empire has no reason to lag behind others. Baron Brooke thought to himself, damn it, how can these two guys be so shameless? Even though they didn't make a single move, it seemed like it was a sure thing that they were starting to compete with Prussia for the leadership position. Then he said, joining the German customs union will not only help consolidate our country's leadership position in the German states, but also increase the country's fiscal revenue and help the return of precious metals. According to Count Korolev's estimate, it will be completed in 20 years. If we cannot pay off the debts of the empire, I'm willing to resign. Together with Count Kolarov. After the Napoleonic Wars, countries sought to prevent the outflow of precious metals. They have set up extremely high trade barriers to prevent other countries from taking gold and silver. At this time, Austria's precious metal reserves were seriously insufficient, and its paper currency lacked credibility. The empire was deeply in debt. So what Baron Brooke said was the pain point of the Austrian Empire, and it aroused great interest in Francis I. Metternich and Count Korolev looked at each other with contempt, cursing in their hearts. It turns out that you, with thick eyebrows and big eyes, are the most shameless. The dignitaries had not recovered from the shock just now, and were shocked by the shamelessness of these three ministers. However, the lessons learned by Prince Esterhazy made these dignitaries hesitate to move forward. After all, the old emperor in front of him was as good as chicken blood, and no one wanted to get into trouble with this. So all the dignitaries turned their attention to Prince Windigoretz. After all, he had a high title and military power, so there would be no problem. Under the gaze of everyone, Prince Windigoretz could only bite the bullet and said, Your Majesty, as you know, the French once asked the three South German countries to withdraw from the customs union we formed. Just in case, it's okay that Windigoretz didn't mention the French. When he mentioned the French, the angry Francis II immediately became furious. French. Damn it. This is the German Zollverein. This is the internal affairs of the German Confederation. Why do they interfere? They dare, notice, to the German states that if France dares to interfere, go to war. Inform the states of the Holy Alliance that, if the French go to war with us, ask them to fulfill their sacred obligations. In a word, if the French want to fight, we will accompany them to the end. The ministers in the Hall of Mirrors were also infected by the emperor's emotions, and applauded one after another. Count Kirill, the Minister of War, even had tears in his eyes. The monarch he had followed for decades finally got tough and shouted, fight. To Paris. However, no one catered to him this time. Everyone shook their heads, saying it was impossible. Seeing this, Count Turel had to pretend that nothing happened. Metternich also lamented that it would be great if the emperor could be so tough every time. It's just that this note is a bit difficult to handle. Even though Prussia was an important state in Germany and a member of the Holy Alliance, it was also the country most opposed to Austria joining the German Zollverein. I just don't know what the King of Prussia thought when he saw this note. As for the French, the possibility of military intervention by them, who had just experienced civil strife, was almost zero. Moreover, if the French really take action, the Holy Alliance will not be a decoration. Just a few decades of peace have passed, and I believe France will never have another Napoleon. Franz applauded at the right time to make the old man happy. The powerful people saw this situation and knew that there was no chance at hand, but their blood will eventually be exhausted. The tactic of procrastination is to be able to procrastinate, and to be able to procrastinate. This is very important for politics. The reason is also very simple. It is necessary to contact the envoys of various countries, prepare the venue and other related matters. Although it is a trivial matter, I cannot refuse. After all, although the matter is small, the relationship is not small, and I can only let these nobles say it. During this period, the powerful are looking for foreign aid when they should, bribing bribes when they should, sending money when they should, and spreading rumors when they should. In short, the 8 immortals crossed the sea and showed their magical powers just to prevent Austria from joining the German customs union. It's just that the emperor agreed to what happened today, and it would be difficult to change it. On the other hand, Metternich, Count Korolev, Baron Brooke, Count Latter, and the almost insignificant Interior Minister Pilsdorf were also preparing for the final counterattack of the powerful point after all. These guys who have no lower limit, God knows what they will do. Count Turel has sent a large number of veteran generals who participated in the anti-French war, such as Henor, Radetzky, and Anton von, to the most critical positions, and told them to be extra careful. What he has to do now is to give these generals enough soldiers and sufficient authority. He didn't want to let people start another uprising right before his eyes. Baron Bruck needed to contact Austria's bankers, convince them that the country had a future, and raise as much money as possible. Because tariffs are lifted, and border trade is opened, the money needed will be astronomical. To do this, he must drain the last drop of blood from those bankers. Metternich needs to persuade as many powerful people as possible in the country. After all, one more friend means one less enemy. Of course, in addition to the domestic opposition, there are also the princes and nobles of the German states. His secret police and lovers had found out the preferences of princes and ambassadors. Metternich specially prepared gifts for each of them. Among them were the King of Prussia and the Prussian ambassador, and of course the chief architect of the German customs union, Friedrich List. I heard that Friedrich List's investment failed, and his life is now very difficult. Now that the Austrian Empire has joined the German customs union, it is in urgent need of such talents. How did I think of this person? Oh, by the way, it seems to be the paper plane thrown by the Grand Duke. Archduke Franz is really the lucky star of this country. Metternich sighed in his heart, but didn't think much about it. Children like to tear up paper, fold some strange things, and throw them around. Isn't this normal? And the most important thing is to let Francis II not go back on his word. After all, this emperor is capricious, not just once or twice. Today we have to thank the future emperor again, otherwise they would not even have the chance to make a last stand now. Chapter 9 Friedrich List. Germany's Article 38 tariffs have paralyzed domestic traffic. They are tantamount to tying a person's hands and feet to prevent blood from flowing. Only by abolishing internal tariffs and establishing a unified tax system for the entire federation can national trade and nationality be restored. Industry also benefits the working class. Friedrich List, the father of the German Zollverein and the challenger of Adam Smith, author of The Wealth of Nations. His life is legendary. The full name is always used here to distinguish it from the musician Liszt who follows. On August 6, 1789, Friedrich List was baptized in Reutlingen. Baptism is usually performed on the day the baby is born. Friedrich List was born into a family of craftsmen. His father was a famous cobbler. During his student days, he also worked part-time as a leatherworker's apprentice, helping his father work. But soon he showed amazing talent and passed the financial officer examination of the Württemberg royal family and became a government clerk. After working in the government for several years, he was sent to university because of his work ability and became a professor. No one would have thought that this was just the beginning of his cheating life. Afterwards, Friedrich List left the university and became the president of the Württemberg Chamber of Commerce and Industry. After this, he became a member of parliament for Württemberg when he had just turned 30. He then left Württemberg and traveled to the New World, America. In the United States, he built farms, opened newspapers, and opened a railroad company. Finally, he used the money he earned to buy a mine, and he also wrote an outline of American political economy in his spare time. Later, he was even appointed as the US Consul General to the German Confederation by the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. In 1832 he returned to Württemberg and began to outline a railway network covering all of Germany. However, his national railway system plan failed due to feudal separatism and the narrow profit-seeking nature of the bourgeoisie. In the end, only a 115-kilometer-long castrated version of the railway was obtained. From Leipzig to Dresden. Friedrich cooperated with others to open a joint stock company in order to build a railway, but the shares that should have belonged to him were assured to him that Leipzig people are different from Americans, and the Germans do not lie to the Germans. My friend cheated me. Point. The two swindlers convinced Friedrich List that all that was left was just a formality, so he did not sign the contract. Point. By the time Friedrich List realized that he had been cheated, the other party had successfully cashed out and disappeared without a trace. Point. In the end, this investment not only did not bring him any income, but caused him to lose 10,000 thalers. The somewhat destitute Friedrich List had to stay in a cheap family hotel. Point. He dragged his exhausted body back to his room, only to find that the door was ajar. He immediately rushed into the room, where an old gentleman was leisurely drinking tea in his room. The attendant standing next to him was quite handsome and burly, and he could tell at a glance that he was a servant of a powerful person. Point. The old gentleman put down his teacup and spoke first. Mr. Lister, please sit down. Friedrich List took off his hat, bowed deeply, and said, "Sir, this is my room. It's mine now." The old gentleman smiled and took out a piece of paper and motioned to the attendant to show it to Friedrich List. Point. Friedrich List took a look and saw that it was a land deed. Then, "Can I take my things?" Friedrich List pointed to the cabinet beside him. "Mr. Lister, please don't worry. I'm here to give you a gift." "Ah, you Santa Claus?" Friedrich List asked. "If you wish, yes. Let us get to the point. My name is Berg Turner, and I'm Master Metternich's butler. I have two things to do today. The first is to give gifts and return your losses. You and I also brought two friends." Berg clapped his hands, and two burly men walked in carrying two sacks, and then threw the sacks heavily on the ground, making a dull sound. Point. Then the sack was opened, and it was revealed that they were the two liars who made Friedrich List hate him. Point. Friedrich List immediately stepped forward and kicked them twice. At this time, the two crooks had their hands and feet tied, and rags were stuffed in their mouths. They could only make two muffled groans. "Are they the Austrian secret police?" asked Friedrich List. "No, they are just enthusiastic citizens who happened to pass by." Berg replied slowly, and then said, "Mr. Lister, are you satisfied with this gift?" "Satisfied. Let's talk about the second thing." List is a sensible person, so he naturally knows that the other party will not show courtesy for nothing. "My master wants to meet you. He thinks you are very talented and should serve His Majesty the Emperor." "What if I say I won't go?" List asked tentatively, and then pointed at the two big men next to him. "Will they put me in a sack?" "No, Mr. Lister. My husband is a civilized man, but I'm not. No matter if I say you are a Rex or a dangerous person, as long as you have my face, it is enough." Berg stood up and spoke. He straightened his clothes. "You convince me, Mr. Berg." Vienna, Hall of Mirrors. Francis II was on the throne, and the ministers and dignitaries below all had their own thoughts, but they seemed to be performing their duties in an orderly manner. Franz II said proudly, "My child, look. The most important temperament of an emperor is that you must first have the aura of a king, and then you can make them bow their heads." It was obvious that the old emperor had drifted away, but Franz still pretended to admire him and said in a child's tone, "Grandpa, why do the French oppose Austria's joining the German customs union?" "The French are all bad guys. They are afraid of us. We in Austria are the chairman of the German Confederation and should protect the interests of the German states, so we must join the German customs union." Franz II wanted to educate his grandson, but he accidentally got around for myself. Franz saw the old emperor digging a hole for himself, so he pushed again. Grandpa, those who have the same views as the French are all bad people, aren't they?" Franz II was silent. Metternich almost spit out a mouthful of old blood. This was really Austria's savior. Unexpectedly, the clearest person in the entire royal family is actually a child. It's just that the dignitaries in the Hall of Mirrors don't have a good expression, especially Prince Windigaretz. He feels that the old emperor is looking at him, and his gaze can kill him. He quickly made an excuse and left the Hall of Mirrors, as if running away. Other dignitaries saw the two bosses. One was exiled to Hungary and the other escaped. Their confidence also collapsed, so the tree fell, and the Hosen dispersed. Looking at the crowds frantically fleeing the Hall of Mirrors, Franz II fell into deep thought. Why didn't he find out in the past that what he trusted was a group of treacherous villains? Count Korolaf thinks this is good. It seems that the workload can be reduced a lot. Count Latter continued his work. He felt that those guys would not give up so easily and must guard against it. Point of course, this also has something to do with Count Latter's personal character. After all, he is a soldier, and if he makes a mistake, his life will be lost. Now Metternich, Karl Affenbruck were all thinking about the same thing, whether to bring Archduke Franz with them to the next political meeting. Chapter 10 Undercurrent. Berlin. William III looked at the Austrian credentials placed on the table and slapped the table hard. The Austrians shamelessly asked to join us. Seeing His Majesty the King so angry, most of the Prussian senior officials remained unmoved. There are even many people who are speaking for Austria, and they are speaking out loudly. Only the German Zollverein Union, that includes Austria, can be called the true German Zollverein Union. These words made William III very angry. Why did he raise such a group of white-eyed wolves? Of course, the white-eyed wolf will also look at the situation and immediately change the subject when the situation is not good. Brandenburg's destiny is to receive the legacy of the Holy Roman Empire, annex Austria, expel Hungary, and establish a truly German state. After hearing this, William III's anger subsided slightly. Obviously, it was Metternich's gold dollar offensive that had an effect. After all, the interests of the country are not as real as the money in your own hands. There is no shortage of greedy people in any country, and there is no shortage of loyal people. Prussian Finance Minister Merz was this kind of person. As the initiator and actual manager of the German Customs Union, he knew very well how much trouble the Austrians had caused. First, they sat back and watched the emergence of 3 customs unions in Germany. Then, like the British, they stayed outside the various alliance systems and kept the 3 alliances in a tripartite situation, intending to let Prussia continue to decline due to internal friction. But fortunately, the Sino-German business alliance itself was not stable. There were endless arguments over the issue of internal unified tariffs, and finally fell apart. The South German Customs Union is sandwiched between France and Austria. The relatively small space makes it difficult for them to do anything. Soon after, the Sino-German Commercial Alliance and the South German Customs Union collapsed one after another, but the Austrians did not give up and successively attracted Saxony and South German states in an attempt to form a customs union of their own, but nothing happened. Your Majesty, Austria must not be allowed to join. Our industry is still too fragile. The Austrians have a first mover advantage over us. If the Austrians are allowed to enter the German Zollverein, endless logging will be waiting for us. Then, the Austrians will use the money they plunder from us to buy our resources, and then make them into goods and sell them to us. One day, we will become their slaves like the Irish. Gentlemen, what should we do? William III asked. Austria must be excluded, otherwise we can only set up trade barriers and carry out trade protection. Isn't the purpose of our establishment of the German Customs Union to eliminate trade barriers and carry out free market trade? That is under the premise that we can harvest others rather than letting others harvest us. The man fell silent, but the discussion became louder. Prime Minister Welixi knew how to persuade these idiots who did not understand economics, so he shouted loudly, "Damn it! The Austrians must be excluded. If Hungarian food is allowed in, who will our food be sold to?" This statement immediately received a response from the junkers and landowners. What they don't know is that at this moment, there is a group of people like them in Hungary. Budapest. Damn it. Damn it. The emperor actually wants to join the German Customs Union. What should we Hungary do? What's wrong with this? It will be cheaper to buy things in the future. I'm tired of always buying Austrian products. This time I went shopping in Berlin. I heard that the prostitutes there are serious. What? Serious nonsense. Let Prussian grain come in, and who will sell our grain to? The Hungarian landowners immediately responded, "We must not allow Prussian grain to enter Hungary. If the emperor does not accept our plea, we will fight to Vienna." The roar was loud. Prince Esterhazy was just silently watching the crazy crowd in a corner. Although he also liked to say that, he knew very well that Hungary could not defeat Austria at this time, otherwise it would not be as simple as shouting slogans. In addition, he missed his palace in Vienna a little bit. As far as the entertainment industry is concerned, Vienna is centuries ahead of Budapest. Hanover. What? The Austrians actually want to join the German Zollverein? What are they thinking? Aren't they afraid of the outflow of gold? If Austria can join, so can we. One minister said, "Ah, you an idiot. Are those Germans rich? Let us use real money and silver to exchange for Austrian waste paper. Our gold must not be wasted on meaningless competition." At that time, the signs of economic crisis in the UK had already appeared, and there was a serious shortage of precious metals. The policy adopted by the British government is to raise trade barriers wildly, to prevent the outflow of precious metals and cope with possible runs. Mainstream European countries have followed suit, but Austria's own debt has exceeded the risk level, and there is no point in stockpiling precious metals. On the contrary, this kind of stable but unredeemable banknotes appear safe at Dresden, Saxony. The Austrians intend to join the German Zollverein. Yes, the Prussians asked us to oppose Austria and reject Austria's request to join the German Zollverein. Why refuse? Wouldn't it be nice to let the Austrians come in and fight the Prussians? Saxony is the center of Germany, and neither the Austrians nor the Prussians can do without us. Wouldn't it be nice to let the tigers and wolves fight, and we wait for the opportunity to get the best of us? Your Majesty, you are wise. Paris, France. The aging Marshal Soult has completely lost the appearance he had when he was a soldier. He has been half asleep and half awake. That's it. The Austrians intend to join the customs union initiated by the Prussians. The Prussians seem not to let them join, and there are also some internal disturbances among the Austrians. I think we should immediately organize a Franco-Belgian alliance to counter the Austrians. Gizzard finished his report and expressed his thoughts. Well, I'm already old. His Majesty the King trusts me and you. I know you are very capable, and I trust you too. As long as you have a clear conscience, and are worthy of His Majesty the King and God. The old Marshal only said I wanted to retire peacefully, so I gave up. Thank you for your trust. I will do my best to live up to your Majesty and your high expectations. Gizzard has also become accustomed to Soult's non-stick pan, and he has no time to play take-eye with this old man. The Franco-Belgian League has always been Gizzard's dream. Although Belgium had just become independent at this time, it was the first country in the entire European continent to industrialize. The industrial strength is extremely strong and the quality of the people is very high. Moreover, Belgium is in a unique position. Bringing Belgium into France's sphere of influence will definitely enhance France's strength and influence. One could go a step further and include the entire lowlands in French territory. Gizzard's idea is very good. The Franco-Belgian alliance can indeed advance and attack, retreat and defend, and it can also enhance its commercial competitiveness. But he ignored one of the most important issues, and that was the British point. There is a joke that even a Belgian flying a kite might fly to England. The Low Countries are definitely the opposite of the British. The British would not allow any powerful country to invade the Low Countries. The British had always been afraid that a country would occupy the lowlands and then use the lowlands as a springboard to attack the British mainland. For Austria to join the German Zollverein, the threat of force like last time may not work. I don't know why the Emperor of the Austrian Empire was so angry that he actually said he wanted to go to war. The Emperor of Austria could have convulsions because that family was not normal. But he, Gizzard, could not afford to suffer from convulsions. He and France could not bear the risk. However, the traitors within Austria can make good use of it. In addition, the Prussians would not be willing to raise their own pigs, so the Austrians cut off their beards. To be fair, although France looks down upon Austria's industrial strength, the Austrians and Prussians still have a high chance of winning the competition. The Prussians also knew this, which would make things much easier. Gizzard already had a plan to unite the anti-Austrian forces in Austria and the German Zollverein. Find a way to refuse Austria's accession to the German customs union. Once the Austrians enter the German customs union, it will no longer be Austria's problem. It is an internal problem in Germany. Although France has never given up its ambitions in the Rhineland, France at this time is still unable to support its ambitions. Chapter 11 Sunshine, Afternoon, and Knee Pillow. Austria, Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. The sun is warm and the leaves are translucent. Under the tree, Franz was lying stretched out on Thalia's lap. Thalia is the governess hired by Madame Sophie for Franz Joseph. According to Thalia's own words, Your Highness, everything is good, but your homework is a bit too strong. Although His Highness still cannot write many words, He can always draw inferences about other cases in physics, chemistry, and mathematics. His Highness can quickly understand many things that Thalia doesn't understand. So much so that Thalia could only read newspapers to His Highness. Also, His Highness has some quirks, that is, he likes to sleep on someone's lap. Thalia thought that the royal family had regulations, that the Grand Duchess could not raise the children herself, so the little Highness was pitiful. Little did she know that Franz was lying on her lap. Drifting away. For Franz now, getting the old emperor to agree to join the German customs union is the limit of what he can do. As for whether it can be added and whether it can cut Prussian leaks after joining, it depends on the fate of God. For Franz, what he should do now is enjoy everything that his identity brings. Sunshine, grass, big white legs. After all, if God doesn't take it, you will suffer the consequences. If you don't take it, you will suffer the disaster. In the afternoon, Franz stretched and found that Thalia was fast asleep. After trying a few pokes, Thalia didn't wake up, but just turned over, and her sleep state was even worse. So Franz walked alone to the table in the garden and opened the newspaper in the corner of the page. There is a message. Land prices in the United States hit a record high. In just 4 years from 1830 to 1834, land in Chicago tripled. The current upward trend in land prices continues unabated and is expected to double again in the next 3 years. Franz smiled. It seemed that the Austrian economists were still conservative. From 1834 to 1837, Chicago land increased 64 times, which directly caused the economic crisis of 1837. In the end, the land returned to its original value. At its peak in 1837, land could be sold for $12,000. By 1839, it was only worth $100. Waiting for buyers. The most serious losses from this economic crisis have been caused by the United Kingdom and the United States, of course, because the economic exchanges between the two sides are too close. At the same time, trade protection policies are generally implemented on the European continent, but the impact is relatively small. It's a pity that France can't invest. Otherwise, if it harms the Americans, France will definitely help. Let the Austrian royal family buy it. What if you refuse to sell during the economic crisis? Franz did not dare to gamble on the greed of human nature. The newspaper devoted 2 pages to reporting that the Austrian Empire was preparing to join the Germans. There are 2 pages. One is to praise Francis II, and the other is to tell the huge benefits that joining the German customs union will bring. At 1 o'clock on January 1st, 1834, the strings of 4-wheeled carriages that had been waiting anxiously at the borders of various states were roaring past like crazy, laden with goods, because all the taxes that had to be paid when entering other countries were cancelled, and profits. All of a sudden, the situation improved a lot, and all German businessmen were busy driven by profits. In 1834, the total trade volume within the German Confederation in just 1 quarter exceeded the annual trade volume in 1833. However, Austria's trade volume increased by only 6%. In the long run, merchants in the Austrian Empire will suffer huge losses. The newspaper described the German customs union as providing Austria with a huge market of 23 million people. Although blind optimism is not advisable, we cannot pour cold water on businessmen at this time. Prince Metternich's censorship of books and newspapers was fairly well implemented, and no objections were found in newspapers. There are also some about rebels in various places. From 1833 to 1834, a total of 12 uprisings occurred in and around Austria. There have been 3 recent incidents that were quickly suppressed. One was small, with only 20 people at the smallest. The other was because the garrison had been on guard for a long time. For this reason, Count Tyrrell assigned Austria's most capable general to the one most likely to break out. The location of the uprising. Only one uprising, in Genoa, was the most numerous and lasted the longest. Franz also saw 2 names he was familiar with, Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi. Franz watched it for a while and finally understood what was going on. The general sent by the Austrian Empire to suppress the uprising was Leakey. This general was very powerful. During the Napoleonic Wars, he was the famous Surrender King and the French money bag. He was captured 11 times by the French army and its allies, and each time he returned to Austria with the ransom, paid by his family. Moreover, this brother was addicted to food. He was captured by the French again and again, and repeatedly asked the emperor to lead troops to fight again. As the governor of Venice in the year of the storm, he had 20,000 troops stationed in the city of Venice. Facing the rebellious citizens, he actually ordered the soldiers to hand over their weapons without firing a shot, leaving only the flag, and leaving the city. It also indirectly ruined the Austrian navy. At that time, the previous Austrian navy marshal died unexpectedly, and the successor marshal was vacationing with beautiful women on the beach in Belgium. Without a commander, most of the Austrian navy's officers and soldiers dispersed, leaving only an unknown captain and less than 100 sailors, who fought fiercely with the rebels for 5 days, and finally all died. If the Austrian navy's fleet was still there would not have been such a funny scene as the 7 Genoese warships blockading the Austrian Empire's military port in Trieste. The city of Venice could not hold out for that long, and Marshal Radetzky did not have to divide his troops to prevent the Venetian army from cutting off the Austrian supply lines. More troops can be put into the front line, and the war can end faster afterwards. General Reich not only was not held accountable, he also took over the Bohemian front in northern Austria, and lived until the age of 85. This piece of trash led more than 10,000 people, chased 800 people from Genoa to Rome, and actually allowed more than 300 of them to escape. After capturing more than 20 prisoners, Franz actually had the nerve to claim credit in the newspaper. Franz was speechless for a moment, and he was determined not to let such people continue to live in a state of solitude. Mazzini, the mastermind behind the uprising, managed to escape to Switzerland. The Swiss Confederation rejected the Austrian and Sardinian government's proposals to expel Mazzini. Historically, Mazzini did not continue to prepare for a new uprising in Switzerland, but traveled across the ocean to seek salvation in England. At this time, Garibaldi, who was just a gunman, did not attract the attention of various countries. On the contrary, this unknown gunman will cause waves in Italy again and again in the future. This man got on a merchant ship and later arrived in South America. He also participated in the independence war of a small country, and made great achievements just when everyone thought Gallipoli would continue to enjoy hero treatment in that small South American country. The president of that small country suddenly had a twitch in his mind, and he actually wanted to criticize a country that was more than 10 times larger than his own land, and had a population that was dozens of times larger than his own. As expected, Garibaldi could only return to Italy. In an inconspicuous corner was written, Friedrich List, from Württemberg, would serve as special advisor to the great Emperor Franz II for a period of 5 years. Franz breathed a sigh of relief, maybe because he was too young. He felt sleepy after just watching for a while. So I put down the newspaper, followed the undulations of the mountains, and got in. Chapter 12. Is there such a good thing? Frankfurt, headquarters of the German Customs Union. Tentative. There is an unwritten rule in this era, that is, when negotiating, there must always be a dance party. Frankfurt is already located in the center of Germany. Coupled with the promotion of trade, Frankfurt's service industry at this time is ranked first in Germany. Historically, Frankfurt Cathedral was the place where the Holy Roman Emperor ascended the throne. On the temporary stage, set up in the center of the venue, one of the most stunning dances attracted everyone's attention. The beautiful dance posture and the peerless appearance made the audience intoxicated. However, the Prussian representative, Frederick Anselin, was not in the mood to appreciate all this, and ordered his entourage to give the dance troupe a sum of money to stop their performance. Even though the performance was over, the representatives were constantly changing glasses, as if they had forgotten about the meeting. The Bavarian representative even chatted about music with the Württemberg representative, and he was so interested that he even started playing four-finger strumming. The Prussian representative had to stop the show to get the meeting back on track. If the alliance could keep Austria out without replying, he would be happy to enjoy it with these people. But the letter sent by the Austrians was more like an ultimatum than an application. Austria will open its borders to members of the German Customs Union in 1 month and will also send its own caravans. If the alliance could not reach an agreement and explicitly reject Austria's accession, Austrian goods would enter Germany through Saxony and Bavaria. As for expecting Saxony and Bavaria to stop Austria, that is simply impossible. The Bavarians were unwilling to cause trouble, and Saxony was happy to see the two powers of Austria and Prussia competing. The representative from Brunswick was the first to speak. "I object. Austria is too big. What we want is free trade, and the addition of Austrians may affect our freedom." As the vanguard of Prussia's unification of Germany, Braunschweig naturally had a duty to do so. Anyway, there are still many countries separated between Brunswick and Austria, and the most important thing is that Prussia exists among them, so he can be so unscrupulous. Isn't Prussia huge? Why don't we expel Prussia from the alliance here? The Saxon representative joked. Saxony has always regarded Prussia as the first obstacle to leading North Germany. At the same time, because a large area of territory was taken over by Prussia, Saxony would not let go of every opportunity to cause discomfort to Prussia. But Prussia has already joined the alliance. Then quit. The representative of Saxony is Ankert, the Saxony Minister of the Interior. Originally, it was not the turn of Ankert, the Interior Minister, to do this kind of thing anyway. But as luck would have it, Saxony's finance minister and foreign minister were both sick, and even the king's advisors were sick. His Majesty Anton has a reputation as a kind-hearted and good man, so he will not force the sick minister to work overtime, so this difficult task naturally falls on his head. It is said that those who can do more work. Although His Majesty Anton often claimed to be the master of the most powerful country in North Germany, Saxony at this time was no longer what it used to be. After the Napoleonic Wars, Saxony was forced to cede 2/5 of its territory to Prussia. By this time 2/3 of Saxony's territory and half its population had fallen into Prussian hands. Saxony's industry and commerce were developed, but since joining the German customs union, he could clearly feel that this advantage was disappearing under the suppression of Prussia intentionally or unintentionally, and he became increasingly dependent on Prussia. In the midst of a declining country and a king who thought he was powerful, every diplomatic incident in Saxony was a torment for the Saxon officials involved. Although the king declared a constitutional monarchy in 1831, the power to promote, appoint and remove officials is still in the hands of the king. The so-called constitutional monarchy is just for those idiots. Prussian Foreign Minister Friedrich Anselin was also full of resentment due to the power gap between Prussia and Austria at this time, and Austria's chairmanship of the German Confederation. Prussia could not take a tough attitude. So Friedrich Anselin was told to prevent the Austrians from joining the German Zollverein, but not to offend the Austrians. The reason for this internal negotiation of the alliance is that Prussian officials hope to silence the Austrians through voting. Therefore, he needs to win as much support as possible through long-term trade. Prussia has won over the majority of small states. However, the powerful states in the German Confederation such as Austria, Bavaria, Saxony, Württemberg, Hanover, and Hesse did not side with Prussia. They either support or depend on Austria, or have their own ambitions. His Majesty William III was only willing to provide financial support of 50,000 thalers. In the spirit of saving what he could. Just now, 2,000 thalers were spent to get that dance troupe to get out. Friedrich Anselin decided to reason with these people before considering bribes. What he didn't expect was that Ankert from Saxony would be so difficult to deal with. What's even more frightening is that what Ankert said seemed to resonate within the alliance. This is also due to Prussia itself. Prussia does have an industrial first mover advantage over other members of the alliance, and the coal and steel in the Rhineland provide Prussia with a resource advantage. Moreover, many of the rules in the alliance were formulated by the Prussians, so there will definitely be a certain degree of bias. In addition, there will definitely be frictions in trade, and businessmen will be jealous, let alone countries as a result. All the representatives in the venue began to recall the bitterness and sweetness, and some even began to report that the Prussians wanted to monopolize the German customs union and cut everyone's leaks at the same time. Representatives from several powerful countries praised the representative from Brunswick as a visionary and a true man who pursues freedom and fairness. Their behavior is self-evident. They not only want to expel Austria and Prussia, but also want not to be resented by Prussia and Austria. The disaster was diverted to the east, and a small city-state like Braunschweig was simply unable to withstand the wrath of either Prussia or Austria. The Brunswick representative immediately panicked and looked at Frederick and Sillen. Frederick and Sillen nodded, then cleared his throat. Representatives, please rest assured. On behalf of the Kingdom of Prussia, I assure you that Prussia has no ambition to dominate Germany, and will never do so. We welcome any German compatriots to join, but we do not welcome those Hungarians in the Habsburg territory. The Habsburg family's territory is too complex, and there are even tariffs between Austria and Hungary. We cannot accept the Austrians' unilateral trade protection. Another representative added. Members of the German customs union do not like the existence of Hungary. After all, most of the German states are still agricultural countries at this time. Hungarian food entering Germany will inevitably impact the market and reduce their income. Frederick and Sillen's speech immediately aroused a resonance, but Metternich was not a simple man. He had already bribed the Thuringen representative to stand up and speak for Austria when necessary. Then, let the Austrians and Hungarians draw a clear line and maintain their tariffs. As long as the Austrians agree, we can still share the entire market. Austria's market and information will definitely inject new vitality into the alliance. But what if the Austrians don't agree? Or what if they violate the agreement? Who can punish the Austrians? The two sides supporting Prussia and Austria were quarreling at this time. In fact, what they didn't know was that within the Austrian Empire, the Hungarian nobles were firmly opposed to joining the German customs union and were gathering in Vienna to plead with the emperor to allow Hungary to be independent from the German customs union. Franz heard that there was such a good thing. Chapter 13 Internal Troubles. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. In fact, according to Franz's design, the Kingdom of Hungary was excluded to reduce resistance. Unexpectedly, the Hungarians themselves have proposed it now. In fact, it is not only Franz who thinks so, but also Mr. Friedrich List, Austria's newly hired special advisor on EU accession. Accession refers to joining the German customs union. Friedrich List took a deep breath and imitated the tone of an Austrian bureaucrat. God bless our emperor. The Hungarians voluntarily withdraw, so the pressure to join the alliance will be much less, compared to the Hungarians. The aristocratic businessmen in northern Italy are very interested in joining the union. Many people expressed their willingness to give up protective tariffs in order to join the union. If the German customs union only allows Netalinia to join and refuses the addition of northern Italy, will chill these people. The concept of Netalina will be used frequently in the future, so I will explain it. Netalinia includes the historical kingdom of Bohemia, the kingdom of Galicia, that is the kingdom of Galicia-Wallen, the kingdom of Dalmatia, the Grand Duchy of Austria, including Upper and Lower Austria, Bukovina Principality, Principality of Carinthia, Principality of Carniola, Principality of Salzburg, Principality of Upper Silesia, Principality of Lower Silesia, Principality of Styria, Moravia Margin, County of Tyrol, Fukuoka-Larburg, as well as the Adriatic coastal territories such as the County of Gorizia, Trieste, and the margin of Istria. Friedrich List replied with a smile, Prime Minister, you are such a good person. But the tariffs between Netalinia and Italy should be an internal issue of Austria. As long as the government is determined, and there is local support, then we will have great operation space. There is not much actual difference between whether northern Italy joins the German customs union or not. You are right, Mr. Lister. I will send someone to inform northern Italy and ask them to wait for our good news. Metternich paused and continued, you know, Mr. Lister, the economy in northern Italy has been declining. If this is allowed to happen, the people will inevitably live in dire straits. At this time, if dangerous elements interfere, the people will be easily deceived. Yes, if the people can't even eat, how can we talk about loyalty to the emperor and loyalty to the country? Friedrich List replied. Prince Metternich shook his head and said softly, Northern Italy's agriculture is self-sufficient enough. The key to the problem is not the farmers, but the merchants and nobles of northern Italy. These people are always greedy. They take advantage of the poor farmers and citizens to benefit themselves. but in the end they have to pay. It's not them who pay the price, it's those poor people who pay the price. Then why should we help them? To help them now is to help ourselves. If we can't appease them, we will suppress them. And now the Austrian Empire's national strength is already stretched thin. This time the Empire can seize the life-saving straw of joining the alliance, thanks to you. Metternich said helplessly. Answer, Mr. Metternich, thank you for your trust in me. Although I was born in Württemberg, I'm also a subject of the Empire. Serving His Majesty the Emperor is the duty of a subject of the Empire. The reason why Friedrich List became a butch in Austria was also due to the generous salary given by Metternich. It is said that power is the best aphrodisiac. Compared with the American consul general in Germany, who has no real power, the identity of the special advisor to the Emperor of Austria is obviously more attractive. Moreover, Austria has a system of granting official posts, and Francis II did not ask Friedrich List to resign from his position as the American consul general in Germany. In other words, he is now a double champion. More importantly, the corrupt life of the Austrian court was clearly more suitable for Friedrich List. The Economist had adapted to the life of the upper class not long after he arrived. He worked during the day and had drinking parties and dances at night. He was already enjoying himself. It's a strange thing to say about people. The workload is obviously very heavy, but if you do a career you like and fulfill your dreams, you won't feel tired. At this time, Friedrich List was in this state. In order to realize his ideal ambitions and want to form a German customs union, he formed an organization called the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry. At that time, Lister and the members of the federation were lobbying in various states, hoping to establish a customs union. However, the Federation's petition was met with contempt and reprimand, and the Confederation Congress did not allow them to use the word Germany. The reason is that there are no German merchants in the world, only merchants from Bavaria, Saxony, Württemberg and other places. He was even slandered as an extremely dangerous element and forced to leave his homeland for the New World. Now he has changed his identity and become an official of the Austrian Empire. It is really unpredictable. Friedrich List was grateful to Prince Metternich, not least for using his power to help him recover lost property and justice. It was even more because Metternich gave him the opportunity to fulfill his dream with his own hands. The German Zollverein with Austria would be complete, great, and unstoppable. The Germans now have their own motherland and can finally protect themselves between the hammer of France and the anvil of Russia. Friedrich List actually didn't care about the other nationalities in the Austrian Empire. Because he saw that in Vienna, a melting pot of nations, ethnic conflicts were far less acute than he had heard. The cultures and ideas of different nations are intertwined to form a brand new culture. Moreover, he firmly believed that with the continuous development of transportation and commerce, ethnic exchanges within Austria would gradually strengthen, and eventually a new nation would be formed. As for language, he didn't think it was a problem, because the difference between High German and North German he spoke was even greater than the difference between Austrian and Danish. List once described that the Prussians spoke German as if they were holding a hammer in their mouths, while the Swiss spoke German without using their tongues at all. Now he not only became an official in Austria, but also deeply trusted by the Prime Minister and the Emperor. Although His Majesty the Emperor does not seem to understand economics very well, it does not matter. What is important is that the Emperor can provide him with this stage. Mr. List, Countess Summer will have a ball tonight, so don't work too late. Metternich reminded her kindly before leaving. Okay, Prime Minister. After Metternich left, Korolaf walked to List. Mr. Lister, you know that, although the Empire's fiscal revenue is increasing every year, under the leadership of Prime Minister Metternich, the Empire's debt is also increasing. The Empire spends tens of millions of FR every year on maintaining stability. Lin. However, uprisings continue throughout the Empire and surrounding areas, and even intensify. Do you know why, my Lord Count? Why did you say this? Friedrich List was a little angry. After all, in a sense, Prince Metternich was Friedrich List's benefactor. Chapter 14 Internal Troubles. A general led 2 brigades of troops to pursue 800 fleeing insurgents from Genoa to Rome. In the end, hundreds of them escaped, only 26 prisoners were captured, and he suffered nearly 1,000 casualties. The most important thing is this is a matter of Sardinia and the Pope. Why should we, the Austrian Empire, provide money and people? Count Korolaf said indignantly. There was no division level unit in the military system of the Austrian Empire. An infantry brigade had 2 infantry regiments, approximately 5,000 men. My Lord Prime Minister, this is also for the sake of stability and unity around the empire. As for military operations, I don't understand. You might as well ask Count Tyrrell for his opinion. At this moment, Count Latta wanted to get under the table or hide in a corner without being discovered. This military operation in Italy seems like a farce performed by a group of third-rate screenwriters and extras, constantly slapping the Austrian military in the face. Moreover, Count Tyrrell did not want to get involved in the fight between Metternich and Count Korolaf at all. However, after hearing Friedrich List's words, he knew there was no way to escape. 10,000 versus 800 is a huge advantage. General Leakey may have been careless. Although the process was somewhat tortuous, the final result was that our Austrian Empire won. Count Tyrrell replied awkwardly, "Tulla, let me tell you. Prince Metternich accepted a bribe from General Reich, so this incompetent general could repeatedly escape the punishment he deserved. More than 100,000 soldiers and civilians died because of his incompetence. If the coffins were connected together, they would fit from Vienna to Budapest." Friedrich List was a little unbelievable, but when he saw Count Korolaf's indignant look, it didn't seem like he was being hypocritical. In fact, he had heard a lot of rumors about Prime Minister Metternich in Vienna recently, such as accepting bribes, being a philanderer, and using his personal relationship with the emperor to influence government affairs. Do you have evidence? Of course. Count Korolaf finished speaking and threw a document in front of Friedrich List. It contains detailed records of the private gifts received by Prince Metternich and his family over the years. Friedrich List took out his glasses from his coat pocket and looked through the document carefully. After just reading 2 pages, he was shocked. The document records all the dirty information about Metternich from 1801, when he served as a diplomat in Dresden, to the present. The bribes received included gold, silver, horses, real estate, mansions, jewelry, art, factories, ships, and ordnance. The number is unbelievable. In fact, Metternich suffered here to a certain extent. For example, if someone wants to bribe the emperor will naturally not accept the bribe directly, so Metternich's white gloves are needed. Another example is that the property confiscated by Prince Esterhazy should have been sold into the state treasury. But Francis II liked it and didn't want the money to enter the treasury, so after a series of operations by Metternich, it became royal property. Friedrich List was greatly shocked in the Hall of Mirrors, and Korolaf knew it was time when he saw this. I know it's hard for you to accept it at the moment, but that's the fact. And, Mr. Lister, do you know why Prince Metternich is so keen to join the German Zollverein? Isn't it for the Empire and His Majesty the Emperor? Mr. List, you are an expert. Haven't you discovered the business opportunities in the German Customs Union? Business opportunities? Friedrich List was a little confused for a while, because in his eyes, there were many business opportunities in the German Customs Union. So how did he know which business opportunity Korolaf was talking about? My lord, the Austrian Empire has not officially joined the German Customs Union. Moreover, there are many business opportunities in the alliance. I wonder what you are referring to. Of course it's a railroad franchise. These words really shocked Friedrich List. You must know that there is currently only one railway in the entire Austria. In 1824, Franz Anton received a special 50-year license from the government, allowing him to build a 139-kilometer, approximately 86-mile, horse-drawn railway line. The line will connect Budejovas on the Vltava River in southern Bohemia to the Danube port city of Linz in Upper Austria, 48 miles to the south. Although Anton received a franchise for this railway, the Imperial government demanded huge returns from him. Even so, Franz Anton still made a handsome profit. Seeing how profitable it was to invest in railways, the entire German region went crazy. The small and medium-sized countries of the German Federation were particularly enthusiastic about this, and they rushed to build railways. to prevent important trade routes from passing through neighboring countries and bypassing them. This is in sharp contrast to the anxiety generated by the German countries in order to control the emerging trade routes and their crazy investment in railway construction. In Austria, there is no sense of tension at all. Only in 1830, engineer Franz Joseph teamed up with banker Solomon von Rothschild to apply to the government for approval of a more ambitious steam locomotive railway project. The line would connect Vienna with the steel and coal mining regions of North Moravia and the salt pans of Galicia further to the east. Once this railway is opened, Moravia, Silesia, Galicia and Bukovina will be connected. However, His Majesty the Emperor rejected this proposal because the black smoke emitted by the steam locomotive might cause pneumonia. Korolev, now the Austrian Empire's finance minister, raised the matter again. Has His Majesty the Emperor changed his mind? Friedrich List immediately realized that this was a huge opportunity. These words came from Count Korolev's mouth and were very credible. And the Chancellor of Finance of the Austrian Empire will definitely not take away my money. Friedrich List thought to himself, but we still have to formally sign the contract. Friedrich List said to himself. I also thought that it was now a great time for the Austrian Empire to join the German customs union. If it could obtain an important franchise, wouldn't it skyrocket from there, became the general manager, married Bayfumi, and reach the pinnacle of life? Sign a contract? Mr. Lister, I mean to sell the railway franchise. His Majesty, the Emperor, recently intends to restart Austria's railway construction plan. Even if His Majesty the Emperor doesn't want to, Metternich will bring up the old matter again. Friedrich List was a little confused. The Emperor allowed the construction of railways. Shouldn't he seize this opportunity to find a high quality line and take a gamble? Your Majesty, shouldn't we seize this opportunity to invest in the construction of railways? This is a business that serves the country and the people, has lasting merits, and can also make a lot of money. Korolev waved his hand and smiled. Have you ever seen a gambler who always wins? No. What do you mean? Friedrich List asked with some confusion. No matter how lucky a gambler is, there will be a day when his luck runs out. But those who open casinos will make profits no matter what. You mean the license to sell the railway franchise? Yes, the current railway market is very good. But who can guarantee that it will always be like this? Rather than risking our fortune and life, it is better to sell this opportunity. At least it can guarantee that we will make a profit without losing money. Korolev used looking expectantly at Friedrich List. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 Internal Troubles. Is there such an operation? Count Korolev's words opened Friedrich List's eyes. But what should we do? Friedrich List was obviously moved. After all, this kind of business without capital is extremely attractive to anyone. It's very simple. Our emperor now trusts you very much. You can use this great opportunity of His Majesty's trust in you to find a way to obtain a business license from him. As long as we work together and cooperate seamlessly, naturally, it can be a win-win situation. Oddly enough, human beings are a very strange animal. They can go from full of passion to self-destruction in an instant. In the face of great temptation, few people can maintain their true intentions. Count Korolev's proposal would allow Friedrich List to earn money that he had not been able to earn in the previous decades. Seeing Friedrich's expression, Korolev knew that he had brought this extremely dangerous economist to his side. He will definitely be his best weapon against Metternich in the future. Korolev understands that it is difficult to retain people with only ideals and beliefs. Only common interests and sins can bind people tightly. At the same time, Prince Metternich, just as Count Korolev said, found his old buddy, the leader of the Austrian banking industry, and the Rothschild family spokesman in Vienna, Solomon Rothschild. Solomon, my old friend, I have great news for you, dear Metternich. You are really my lucky star. You always have so much good news, and this time you brought me something. The Two have known each other for many years and share many common interests. There was not much nonsense during the meeting, just a few simple greetings, and then we got down to business. With the approval of His Majesty Franz II, the Northern Company Railway Company has been announced. Congratulations on becoming the founder of the first steam railway in the Austrian Empire. This will be a historic moment, and the people will remember your achievements. In fact, the Rothschild family has its own intelligence system. He had already learned the news before Metternich arrived, and had prepared a generous gift for Prince Metternich. But Metternich actually came in person today, which was very unusual. However, it just so happened that he also wanted to see this old friend. You are exaggerating. I'm just a businessman. This is all thanks to His Majesty's wiseness and your help. Solomon Rothschild continued to say while being humble. Your Excellency, you can just ask Butlerberg to come over for this kind of thing. Why come here in person? I think you don't just have this good news to tell me. Metternich smiled. Solomon, you are still so smart. I can't hide anything from you. There is also good news. According to the original plan, the route operated by the Northern Railway Company was from Vienna to Brno, and then to Lviv via Olmütz. This serves as a link between Vienna and Moravia, Silesia, Galicia, and Bukovina. Metternich took the tea from the servant, blew it on it. Maybe it was a little hot, so he put it aside and continued. Now, His Majesty Franz II has authorized you to add an additional line. This line starts from Vienna in the south, passes through Prague, and ends in Dresden. When the Austrian Empire officially joins the German Customs Union, you should know that this line will explode what a huge potential there is. Even if Austria did not join the German Zollverein, this route was historically popular because it passed through rich areas. If Metternich's words were followed, the Rothschilds would have a railway line that completely covered the north of Netolinia. The total length will reach an astonishing 1,100 kilometers, connecting the most developed areas of Natalina, and its economic value is self-evident. Your Majesty, Prime Minister, please convey my sincere gratitude to His Majesty the Emperor. Our Rothschild Bank will always be a friend of the Habsburg family. After saying that, several strong men walked in from the door and laboriously pulled a cart. There was a big iron box in the car. Metternich, my old friend, I have specially prepared a gift for you, but you need to promise me something. Metternich was also an old man, and he knew that Solomon Rothschild, a greedy guy, must be planning a bigger conspiracy. He didn't answer. Metternich did not answer, as Solomon Rothschild expected. He ordered his men to open the box. The heavy chains were removed, the lid of the box was slowly opened, and it was filled with neatly arranged gold bars. There are 1,500 gold bars here, each of which is a standard 100 ounces. If you can make His Majesty the Emperor accept my proposal, I'm willing to give you another 2,000 gold bars as a thank you gift. A 100-ounce gold bar costs approximately 4,250 florins, equivalent to 42.5 years of military pay for an ordinary soldier. The total price of this gift is 17,000 military pay for an ordinary soldier. In addition, the density of gold is very high, 3 times that of iron, so it is entirely possible to store 1.5 tons of gold in a large iron box. Solomon, my friend, what do you want? Southern Railway Company, with all due respect, my friend, your condition is difficult to meet. Metternich replied, Your Highness, I know that you have been worrying about the affairs of the northern Italians. Now we have a chance once and for all. As long as we build the railway to Venice, we can tie the interests of Italian merchants and nobles with the interests of the empire. Together, the Italians will no longer be able to resist the rule of the Austrian Empire. Solomon Rothschild did not need to say these words. Metternich also knew them in his heart. It's just that Netolinia's railway cannot be controlled by one person or one company. This is something His Majesty the Emperor will never allow. Having served Franz II for so many years, he knows very well where Franz II's bottom line is. And personally, he did not want Solomon Rothschild to control the entire Austrian transportation system. Because by then, this Emperor Solomon will become even more arrogant. This Solomon Rothschild likes to compare his family to the 6th great power in the world. His subordinates naturally liked him, and called him Emperor. Although Solomon Rothschild liked this title very much, he did not allow others to mention it in public. After all, there was another emperor in Vienna. The reason why Metternich came to visit him personally was because he was afraid that Solomon Rothschild had ambitions for the Southern Railway. For this reason, Metternich also planned to obtain the route from Vienna to Dresden from the emperor to satisfy Solomon Rothschild's appetite. Solomon, you know that our emperor is an extremely careful person. He will not put his eggs in one basket, let alone allow someone to take away his basket. Metternich's words had made it very clear, but Solomon Rothschild seemed to have no intention of giving up. You and His Majesty will think it over carefully. If His Majesty needs it, Rothschild Bank is also willing to provide His Majesty with an interest-free loan of 10 million florins. The reason why Solomon Rothschild was so persistent was not only because he was optimistic about the future of the Austrian Imperial Railway, but also because a French friend gave him a promise point. As long as Solomon can take over the Austrian Railway and transfer control to a French company, or provide help to France at critical moments, then he will be France's most important friend. Austria's road to joining the German customs union is long and difficult. Even before joining the German Zollverein, the division of interests among factions within the government began. Chapter 16 Fairness. Frankfurt, headquarters of the German customs union. Damn it. The Hungarians in Austria cannot join, and the Poles in the Kingdom of Prussia should also get out. Yes, get out, Poles. Frederick Ancillon was tired of the endless squabbling, and the finger was now directed at the Poles in Prussia. The Austrians made a cut with the Hungarians. Prussia should also cut with those Poles. Yes. Why should those dirty Poles enjoy the convenience of the German customs union? At this time, the representative of Baden felt that the time had come. He had already been bribed by the French. His purpose was to help the Prussians and prevent Austria from joining the German customs union. Now seeing the decline of the Prussian side, he had another purpose and tried to bring France into the German customs union. Although this was almost impossible, the French promised generous rewards at the same time. He also told him what a tragic outcome would be if he didn't do it. Baden is close to France and is most influenced by France. It often has to act as the vanguard of the French. He appealed. If the Poles in Prussia and the Hungarians in Austria can join our sacred German Zollverein, then the French can join too. France has a wider market and better goods. However, before he finished speaking, he was met with fierce opposition from the entire venue, and some people even gathered around him. You're a Frenchman's lackey. You have no right to stay here. Get out. I don't know who threw a wine glass on the head of Representative Baden. Broken glass and wine spilled all over him, making him look very embarrassed. Oh, damn. What have you done? I'm a noble. His words scolded the nobles and civilian-born officials present. The nobles felt that this kind of person insulted the nobles as a group, and the civilians felt that this noble looked down on their origins. As you can imagine, the angry crowd beat the noble-born Baden representative to a pulp. Then the famous scene reappeared. Representatives of the German Saals Union, regardless of nationality or origin, worked together to throw him out of the window. The unity was only temporary. With the sound of glass breaking, then the sound of glass falling to the ground, and a heavy groan, the venue was temporarily quiet. After a brief calm, the quarrel continued. Austria cannot join the German Zollverein. It is an autocratic country. Prince Metternich and Francis II's desire to pry into other people's privacy is endless. Yes, the Austrian secret police are everywhere. We cannot tolerate such an authoritarian country joining our free German Zollverein. The Prussian side began a new round of offensive. Before the representatives supporting the Austrian side could speak. Ancud of Saxony spoke again. It's as if you in Prussia are not autocracy. You also have a lot of spies. Taking advantage of the fact that the German customs union has just been established and the system is not perfect, your spies infiltrated various countries to collect commercial and military intelligence. We in Saxony have already arrested 10 of you. I don't need to say more about the ambitions of the Prussians. Delegates supporting the Austrian side immediately counterattacked. Yes, Prussia is also an absolute monarchy. Where is the freedom? If the Prussians are acting so unscrupulously, Austria should send their secret police to supervise the operation of the alliance. Yes, Austria is the chairman of the German Confederation and should supervise and manage the operation of the German customs union. Friedrich. Anselm's nose was already crooked with anger. Why does this damn Saxon always have trouble with him? Lord Ankert, are you targeting our country, or are you saying that this is the intention of your Saxon king Antony? Ankert said with a smile, I just find it funny. You Prussians are exactly the same as Austria. Why can you join the Germans Wolverine, but the Austrians can't? Just because you have become a bitch, do you still want to build a memorial arch? The Germans Wolverine belongs to Prussia. Ankert sneered, listen, you Prussia haven't become the chairman of the German customs union yet. You formulate trade rules, plan trade routes, and prevent other countries from joining. Do you really think that the German customs union belongs to you and Prussia? You're talking nonsense. You Frederick Anselm became a little angry point at this time. The representative from Frankfurt grabbed him and said, let's just vote. At this time Frederick Anselm regained his composure. The German customs union was indeed initiated by Prussia, but all representatives within the alliance are equal within the alliance. I propose to use a vote to decide whether to admit Austria. Based on the number of votes, the number of votes will determine whether to admit Austria. Does every state in the Federation use the same number of votes? Does the number of votes in Hesse-Stadt and Bavaria also have the same number? Asked the Bavarian representative. Frederick Anselm answered confidently, of course it's the same number of votes, so that we can reflect the fairness and justice of the alliance. Frederick Anselm knew that the number of countries on his side would definitely exceed that of Austria. As for this conspiracy, he didn't need to do anything. He just had to wait. I think this is unfair. Because Prussia occupies an important position in Germany, many small states have to pass through your Prussian territory. Therefore, there is no guarantee that they will not be inclined to you. Ankert said. Frederick Anselm smiled. We, in Prussia, will not do this. All this is just your guess. If Austria cannot obtain the support of more than half of the alliance, it can only prove that rejecting Austria is what the people want. At this time, a representative stood up. I have a request, please. Say, at this time, Frederick Anselm felt that he had a chance to win and seemed very generous. I ask for a secret vote. Whether Austria joins the Germans Wolverine or not, a small country like ours cannot withstand the wrath of either Prussia or Austria. Frederick Anselm thought about it. The small states on his side would indeed be worried about the Austrian revenge. After all, Metternich and his secret police force had a notorious reputation. No problem. Of course it will be a secret ballot. You don't have to worry about it. No one will retaliate against you. Frederick Anselm readily agreed and gave everyone reassurance. After everyone had no objections, the voting officially began. The 36 members of the German Customs Union have a total of 36 votes. If the party supporting Austria's entry into the Union reaches half of the votes, the alliance will approve Austria's entry into the German Customs Union. If not, it will reject it. In order to show fairness, all votes will be collected in public by Miss Ajani, the principal dancer of the nice cabaret in France. Then we will open the ballot box directly in the center of the venue and announce the votes. The description here is a bit boring. If readers need it, I can add it later. Please give me a reward, a monthly pass, a recommendation ticket, etc. Bang bang bang. There should be one more tonight. Chapter 17. It's reasonable but unexpected. 25 to 10. How is this possible? Set the time back a quarter of an hour. Gorgeous dancer Jenny wore a red and white strapless dance dress and held the ballot box on her chest. The ups and downs made the representatives who were preparing to vote feel emotional, and they didn't know where to put their votes. Ajani's steps were really swaying, and the representatives of Bavaria said that this woman could not be allowed to enter Bavaria, otherwise their king would cause a new scandal. What they didn't know was that the French beauty in front of them was actually the current leader of the Polish Restoration Army. She is the wife of former Polish Free Army commander Bokin Jagata and the mother of a 4-year-old girl. The Polish uprising failed in 1830, and a large number of Polish soldiers were massacred and exiled. This also included Mrs. Agata's husband. After her husband left, she decided to continue her husband's career and became the leader of the Polish Restoration Army. However, under Russia's bloody suppression, the soldiers of the Polish Restoration Army were slaughtered and all the industry was lost. In order to feed thousands of members of the Polish Zionist army scattered across Europe and to continue the cause of the Polish Zionist army, Mrs. Agata organized a large number of widows of the Polish Zionist army to go abroad to earn extra money and solicit sponsorship. Jenny was just one of her pseudonyms, but she quickly received extra attention due to her outstanding talent. Invitations flew in like flakes, but most of them just wanted to spend the night with her. Jenny hates these men very much, but has to walk among them. Today she was invited by the local archbishop, and the dignified bishop actually asked her to perform a sideshow in the evening. However, Jenny decisively refused, because today someone actually gave her 2,000 florins to stop performing. And then gave her 1,000 florins to collect votes. It's so easy to make money this way, why waste yourself? She couldn't understand those sisters who sold their bodies. After all, Jenny could make money in one day that those poor women couldn't make in a year. Another purpose of her coming to Frankfurt today is to seek allies to support their cause. After all, the Polish Federation is no longer here, and restoration requires more than just money. But when she heard that some representatives said that Poles were dirty, she felt angry and aggrieved. She thought of her husband, her daughter who was fostered with friends, and her friends who had been massacred by the Russians. Jani's tears welled up in her eyes, but they aroused the man's protective desire even more. Soon all 35 representatives voted, and the Baden representative was taken to the hospital and deemed to have abstained. This is also Frederick Anselon's arrangement. Although according to his estimation, Prussia will have at least 20 votes, there is nothing wrong with killing an opponent who does not support him. The ballot box was opened in public and the Archbishop of Frankfurt unfolded the first ballot, B, opposed to, Jenny, smiled, took the ballot, raised her hands above her head, and repeated with a smile, 1. Vote against, 3. Votes against, 3. Pictures in a row were all from Prussia, which made Frederick Anselon curl up with a sneer on his lips. He looked at Ankert, who was drinking alone, maliciously, and thought to himself, after expelling the Austrians, I will deal with you Saxony next. I want you to pay back tenfold for today's humiliation. Ankert felt the gaze of Frederick Anselon, looked at each other, and then responded with a smile. Austria, 1. Vote for Austria, 3 votes against, Frederick. Anselon didn't take it seriously, and asked the waiter for a glass of wine. Austria, B. Opposed to, 3. Votes were cast in favor of Austria joining the German Zollverein and 4 votes were cast against it. After that, the votes of both parties increased alternately, which made Frederick Anselon a little irritated. At this time, he thought of Ankert's smile again, and that guy seemed to want to say something. Austria, 15. Votes were cast in favor of Austria joining the German Zollverein, while only 7 were opposed. This made Frederick Anselon feel his throat was a little dry, so he drank the entire contents of the cup in one gulp. Austria, this was the 16th vote, and Frederick Anselon was choked. The Brunswick representative vomited red wine all over his body. Just as the man was about to stand up to protest, he saw that it was Frederick Anselon, and sat down again, so he had to take out his handkerchief and wipe the wine stains. Damn it, someone betrayed us. Frederick Anselon cursed in his heart, glad that he had just excluded a representative who supported the Austrians. Austria, 17. Votes in Austria, 7 against, with just 1 more vote, Austria would be allowed to join the German Zollverein, and Friedrich Anselon's errand would be ruined. His palms were all sweaty. The Bishop of Frankfurt picked up a ballot, slowly unfolded it, then hesitated for a while, and announced loudly, Austria, 18. Votes in Austria, 7 against, Friedrich. Anselon stared angrily at the Archbishop of Frankfurt, seeking answers from him. But the Archbishop of Frankfurt just shrugged. He did support the Prussian side, and voted against it. He didn't know why the situation was like this, but he knew that the Prussians were no longer the only one, and now that the Austrians were coming, he had to think about the future, so he had to act happy. Austria, the Counting of votes continued, but Frederick Ancillon had collapsed on his chair and Kurt turned to Frederick Ancillon again and spoke word by word. "Congratulations, you have your right hand." Then he raised his glass, signaled to Frederick Ancillon, and drank it in one gulp. Point at this time, the Archbishop of Frankfurt also officially announced the German Customs Union, with 25 votes in favor, 10 votes against, and 1 abstention, approved Austria's application to join the German Customs Union. "We will welcome the 37th member of the German Customs Union. Germany will usher in a better future." Faced with the results before him, Frederick Ancillon knew that his political career was over. Frederick Ancillon knew that the Austrians must have bribed Prussia's allies, but this time a secret ballot was used, and he had no idea who betrayed Prussia. He still has 47,000 thalers left unspent. If he returns to Berlin like this, then William III and Finance Minister Merz will definitely not let him go. Ever since he came up with a way. Friedrich Ancillon asked Ajani to wait for him in his room, for which he spent 5,000 thalers, but he no longer cared, and now he just wanted to spend all the money. In addition to the 8,000 thalers he had already spent. He exchanged the remaining 42,000 thalers for jewelry and the land deeds in a suitcase. Frederick Ancillon's throat felt very tight on the way, and he impatiently took off his belt as soon as he entered the door, but a dagger passed in front of him and was pressed against his neck. "Put your pants on. Where did you put your money, Frederick?" Ancillon quickly put on his belt and said, "Thief. Woman, I'm the envoy of Prussia. You dare to rob me, Frederick." Ancillon said while looking for opportunities, but what made him despair was that another woman walked out of the room with a pistol on her waist. Ajani walked towards Frederick Ancillon with elegant steps, which made Frederick Ancillon a little at a loss at this moment. Ajani snatched the suitcase from Frederick Ancillon, opened it with a dagger, and saw the shining jewelry inside. "This is the property of the King of Prussia," threatened Frederick Ancillon. Ajani tied one of the gemstone necklaces around her neck and said with a smile, "Not anymore. Who are you? Polish Nationalist Army?" Ajani replied, and then nodded to the woman behind Friedrich Ancillon. Before Frederick Ancillon could continue to speak, the woman picked up a vase and hit him on the back of the head. Looking at Frederick Ancillon, who fell on the ground and the vase that was broken to the ground, Ajani felt helpless. "Caroline, I told you not to use the vase several times. It will be difficult to clean up. Then what should I do?" "I'll smash it anyway. Carry him inside and make it look like he's hanging. I'll leave tonight. You go tell the other sisters to leave quickly." After saying that, Ajani threw a ring inlaid with gems to Caroline. Vienna. News: the Prussian ambassador committed suicide in the hotel out of fear of guilt. Chapter 18 Daily Life. Today, Franz II was in a very happy mood and almost jumped up. Under the clever operation of Prince Metternich, the property of the Elthersy family in Austria did not enter the state treasury, but went to the personal name of Francis I. Franz II once visited the palace of the Elthersy family. It can be described as magnificent. Although it is not as good as the palace, it is better than any royal manor. Although the works of art in the palace were taken away, the 3,000 barrels of wine in the underground wine cellar of the manor could not be taken away. The deacon who was sent to take over the property selected 100 barrels and sent them to Vienna, where they were then given to the princes and nobles of Vienna by Francis I. Franz II intended to leave the Elthersy family property to his grandson Franz Joseph. After all, he is very aware of the economic situation of the Austrian Empire. The debts of the Austrian Empire may not be repaid in his lifetime. I'm afraid that when Franz Joseph comes to the throne, Austria's debt will still exist. Although a true man cannot live without power for a day, it is not easy for an emperor to live without money. The property of the Elthersy family was left to Franz Joseph in the hope that it could be used for emergency purposes in times of crisis. At this time, Franz II still had something in his hand, and he had not yet decided whether to give it to his grandson. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace, children's room. Franz Joseph wore a special light cavalry uniform today, and was so happy to see Franz II entering the door. Franz Joseph knew that the old emperor would definitely share his joy, although he had long known from the newspapers that the German Customs Union had agreed to accept the Austrian Empire. But Franz Joseph still planned to pretend not to know. After all, after the Congress of Vienna, Austria had almost no diplomatic victories, which made the old emperor happy. When Franz II entered the door and saw Franz Joseph in military uniform, he immediately stopped, stood up straight, raised his hand and saluted, and said, "Hello, soldier, Franz." Joseph also immediately stood upright with a snap and shouted, "Long live the emperor." Franz II picked up his grandchildren, and the old one and the young one laughed together. The old emperor always felt very comfortable spending time with his grandson. Looking at the little boy in front of him, he seemed to see the future of the Austrian Empire. But he really didn't have the courage to challenge the rules set by his ancestors, and he didn't want his young grandson to shoulder the entire empire. He should have a happy childhood, Franz II said to himself. Perhaps realizing his gaffe, Franz II suddenly smiled mysteriously. "Grandson, grandpa has a treasure in his hand. Guess what it is? If you guess it right, I'll give it to you." In fact, when Franz II first entered the door, Franz Joseph found an envelope in his hand. Considering recent events, this envelope contains either the good news from the front about successfully joining the German customs union, or Prince Alpheus's deposit of 3 million florins. According to Franz's estimation, it is more likely to be deposit notes. But what can Franz do with the money now? Buy candy. So he replied, "Yes." Franz II took out the envelope from his back, handed it to Franz, and said, "You answered correctly. You should keep this envelope until you grow up before opening it." Franz Joseph looked at the envelope with some confusion. It was indeed mailed from Rothschild Bank. It was a deposit note. But Franz didn't understand why the old emperor wanted to give this money to a child like himself. But he knew that the old emperor hoped that Franz could keep the money. Franz immediately ran to his treasure box with the envelope, threw the envelope in, and locked it with a lock. Franz II nodded happily when he saw this, then played with his grandson for a while, and left. At the end of the corridor, Francis II began to talk to himself again. "Forgive Grandpa for being timid and cowardly. I hope this money can compensate you." Franz was a little confused. He didn't know what to do with the money. 3 million florins seems to be enough as a starting capital, but I don't know when I can start my plan. Giving this money to Mrs. Sophie seems to be a good choice, and maybe you can get a good income. But if Mrs. Sophie's investment fails, wouldn't she also suffer? Perhaps there is another way. Night, Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Franz stared at the latest world map, lost in thought. Central America, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the wild Australia at this time are all territories that can be expanded. It's just that Franz is too young to participate in political affairs. On the other hand, the Austrian Navy is really in a hurry, and even if it has the idea, it does not have the ability. While Franz was still thinking, Madame Sophie walked in. Franz stopped scribbling on the map all the time. After being lectured by Mrs. Sophie, Franz started today's story time. When it comes to major events in the world, if we are separated for a long time, we will unite, and if we are together for a long time, we will be divided. Let's talk about Prime Minister Ko entering Wancheng. An hour later, Franz, who was already very sleepy, looked at Mrs. Sophie, who was listening attentively. Franz sighed to himself, "I feel so sleepy and want to sleep. Why is my mother so energetic today?" But this was definitely not the way to go, so Franz suddenly had an idea, picked up the exquisitely packaged Bible next to him, smashed it on the table, and shouted, "Foretell what will happen in the future, and listen to the next chapter." Mrs. Sophie looked a little unfinished and sighed. "Prime Minister Ko, you are such a good man. What a blessing." Franz couldn't help complaining in his mind. What a magnificent love. Where is the love? This kind of greedy mentality is not advisable. Mother, your thoughts are very dangerous. Franz couldn't help but continue to complain in his heart. Who told you this love story? Is it Thalia? Bohemians are always so open-minded. Mrs. Sophie added, but you are still so young, and she dares to do this. If you are older, I really don't know what this woman will do. Franz was a little helpless. It took him more than half a year to realize that something was wrong. But it's great that Mrs. Sophie can automatically think of Thalia as the governess at the very least. Franz doesn't have to explain anything now. Point as for whether Talia would probably have her wages deducted, Franz didn't think much about it and just nodded. Point anyway, there is nothing wrong with throwing all the blame to this bohemian point because of her inherent pride and prejudice. Thalia, as the daughter of a small bohemian noble, secretly completed her university studies without telling her family. Point you must know that in this era, people who can complete college studies can already be regarded as social elites. In 1834, there were only 7,191 students enrolled in all Austrian universities combined. Point, but the result was shocking. Antelia was kicked out by his father. Desperate, she became Franz's tutor by chance. Chapter 19 Investment. Vienna, Royal Garden. Point the breeze blows, bringing the fragrance of earth. Point in the woods nearby. Franz Joseph was swinging on a swing. Point on the neatly manicured garden lawn, Archbishop Franz Karol was sipping wine at a makeshift round table. Wine. Again. Archduke Franz Karol thought to himself. Point this is certain. Franz II got 3,000 barrels of wine from the Elfasy family's wine cellar, and he knew that his son was good at wine. Point as a result, Archduke Franz Karol seemed inseparable from these wines. Baron Bruck carried a suitcase and walked carefully on the lawn of the garden, fearing that he would step on the flowers and destroy the overall beauty of the garden. Point Baron Bruck took off his hat and bowed. Archduke Franz Karol, you are looking for me, Archduke. Franz Karol glanced at Baron Bruck. Sit down, Baron. Bruck actually made appointments with several bankers in the afternoon to discuss borrowing money, but he had to go to Archduke Franz Karol's invitation. If the Archduke, who is not very bright, insists on dragging him away, it will be over. Sit down. Seeing that Baron Bruck did not sit down, Archduke Franz Karol emphasized his tone again. Point Baron Bruck had no choice but to sit down. After all, the other party was the royal family. Drink. Archduke Franz Karol handed Baron Bruck a cup filled with wine. Point Baron Bruck looked at Archduke Franz Karol, then drank it all in one gulp. Okay, I have an investment, Archduke. Franz Karol rarely said these words, so it was extremely difficult for him to say them. Investment? Baron Bruck was a little dizzy. He had just learned that the Grand Duke, who was not very bright, actually knew how to invest. Point then I thought, maybe I was cheated. It's wrong to think about it. Point so he asked, Grand Duke, what kind of investment is it? I'll help you find out the details. No need. Archduke Franz Karol took out a piece of paper from his arms, slapped it on the table, and crossed it. Point Baron Bruck took out his monocle from his coat pocket, put it on his eye socket, and studied the note carefully. Point it says, I have 3 million florins. You go and buy land in Chicago and New York. Buy whatever you want, as long as you sell it before Christmas. 1836. There is also a simple contract at the back. Point the handwriting is very sloppy, and the handwriting is a bit childish, like it was written by a child. Point however, Baron Bruck was not suspicious. After all, it would be great if the Grand Duke in front of him, who was not very good at speaking, could write. The real estate market in the United States is indeed good, and I also have acquaintances who operate real estate in the United States. But Archduke Franz Karol, I must remind you that the United States is a barbaric land, and the credit of those barbarians is very questionable. Those lands have risen so much. Be quick. Sooner or later something will go wrong. At that time, Europeans regarded Americans as barbarians, and mainstream European bankers believed that there would be problems if land in the United States rose too fast. However, because everyone believed in free economics, no one came out to stop it. I don't care. My son wants to buy it, Archduke Franz Karol said while drinking wine. Baron Bruck was speechless for a while. The little Grand Duke was only 4 years old. He was a very cute child and was playing on the swing. It seems that Archduke Franz Karol really drank too much. Baron Bruck thought to himself and asked, do you want to buy it, or does the little Grand Duke want to buy it? How should I fill out this contract? Archduke Franz Karol realized something was wrong, so he changed his words. I bought it for my son, Baron. Bruck let out a sigh of relief. That's right. It makes sense. Baron Bruck worked hard on the contract, put the copy into his box, and then handed the original to Archduke Franz Karol. At this time, Thalia on the side took the contract and examined it carefully. After confirming that Baron Bruck had not done anything wrong, He put the contract into the box he had prepared. In advance. It was normal to check the contract. On the contrary, Baron Brooke was impressed by the legendary Archduke, who was not very smart. After all, when it comes to land speculation in the United States, people in the industry know that the Duke is definitely visionary and courageous in being able to see this trend and make such a big move. Your Excellency, please rest assured that with me, Brooke, you will definitely be able to buy the best quality land. If you have no other instructions, I have an important meeting in the afternoon related to the national finance. You know, we are now joined the Germans Wolverine and used money everywhere. Archduke Franz Karl motioned for Brooke to sit down and then poured him another glass of wine. Drink and go, Baron. Brooke rarely drank, especially during working hours, but the Archduke's offer was irresistible, and he drank the contents of his glass in one gulp. Archduke Franz Karl watched Baron Brooke leave and made some comments about his temporary drinking partner. What? A nice guy, but he likes to force himself too much. At this time, Franz had jumped off the swing and was excited with the contract in his hand. Franz knew that this 3 million investment would increase 64 times in the next 3 years. This money will be a big boost for Franz in the future, and even better, it will be able to cut the Americans' leaks. But what made him happiest was that Baron Brooke was, as he thought, a truly honest and reliable man. Even in the face of such a huge temptation of 3 million florins, he did not tamper with the contract. I think you are abnormal. Archduke Franz Karl spoke first. Father, I'm normal. You are the one who is abnormal, so you think others are not normal. Franz replied. Archduke Franz Karl scratched his bald head and felt that what his son said seemed to make sense. Don't think too much. Drink. I respect you. Franz Joseph raised his juice. Well, I don't want to think about it anymore. Archduke Franz Karl seemed to want to say something, but he couldn't think of how to say it. Franz Joseph answered. 1. Drink can solve 1,000 worries, right? The collision of 2 wine glasses does not mean 1,000 words, but it is worth 1,000 words. Thalia was a witness to everything, but she didn't know what she should say, and even if she did, no one would believe it. At that time, she was kicked out of her family and came to Vienna alone. Thalia disguised herself as a man in order to prove that she was no worse than a man. She passed the exam as a clerk in the Prime Minister's office, but she took off her men's clothing on a whim. I thought I would shock everyone with my skills, but I didn't expect that it would arouse the anger of the men present. Feeling humiliated, the officials and candidates prepared to hang her from a tree. Fortunately, Lady Sophie passed by and the royal guards rescued her. At this point, she became Franz's tutor. The little Grand Duke and the Grand Duchess were her benefactors, and they were her only support in the palace. Thalia knew that if she betrayed the little Grand Duke and Grand Duchess, she would lose everything, which was the result that Lady Sophie wanted. It's just that she didn't expect that the little Grand Guild was so special. Maybe he was the Emperor. Chapter 20. Calm. We silk weavers. Every one of them was so poor that they were naked. People who are high officials, put on your coat and wear your brocade breastband. We weave these. However, even if he died of hunger, he would not have a piece of cloth to cover himself with. We silk weavers. Every one of them was so poor that they were naked. But our world is coming soon. Your world will be destroyed. At that time, we will the morning close of the old world, because the thunder of uprising has already sounded in the sky. The Second Lion Workers' Uprising shocked France and helped Austria. The situation of internal and external troubles that Franz expected did not occur. On the contrary, it seemed to be extremely smooth. It seems that all problems have been solved after the Hungarians decided to withdraw from the German Tsar's Union. The Prussian ambassador hanged himself and spent all the funds allocated by the Prussian government. To add to the disgrace of the Prussian government, more than one dancing girl was seen entering and leaving the Prussian ambassador's room. So some bad guys connected money, women and ambassadors, and concocted a series of scandals. Prussia's successor foreign minister had to say in public that the former foreign minister loved his wife very much, and the cause of the matter was under investigation. It would have been better not to investigate. Once investigated, the Prussians discovered that the matter was related to an organization called the Polish Restoration Army. At this time, the Prussian military could not sit still and assassinated the Prussian foreign minister. This was too bold. The Prussian high-level officials were even more insecure, fearing that they would be found by members of the Polish nationalist army. The turnover of Berlin's brothels dropped sharply that month. The French were not much better. Just after the plague, a workers' uprising of unprecedented scale broke out in Lyon. This is entirely because factory owners do not treat workers as human beings. At this time, French workers had to work 18 hours a day and even had to work overtime. Since a large-scale uprising broke out in France in 1831, the top management promulgated the October Decree in order to prevent workers from forming associations. In October 1833, the July monarchy government issued a decree prohibiting association and the existence of groups of more than 20 people. But as the saying goes, there are policies from above and countermeasures from below. The workers broke into pieces and established countless small groups of less than 20 people. As a result, the association not only did not stop, but became more and more crazy, which made King Louis Philippe very angry. In March 1834, the rulers of the July dynasty issued a decree prohibiting workers from organizing new societies, forcing workers to dissolve existing mutual aid societies, otherwise all members would be punished, and ordered the arrest of worker leaders. This angered the workers, who decided to take up arms against the July monarchy. But the French were much more efficient than the Austrians in suppressing the revolution. The troops of the July dynasty had long been prepared. After the uprising broke out, the troops of the July dynasty quickly entered the city, occupied various crossroads and major strongholds, and set up artillery outside the city. The Lyon rebels were already in trouble. Of course, the French's ability to rebel is not limited. The rebels are rich in experience. Even when faced with the pressure of soldiers, they still choose street fighting. If the army wants to win, it must attack room by room, and it will have to pay a huge price. Fight with the army in the field, unless you encounter a full general with a group of soldiers who don't want to fight. Otherwise, the rebel army without heavy firepower will face the fate of being massacred by the regular army. On the other hand, the uprising in Paris caught the senior officials of the July dynasty somewhat unexpectedly. July monarchy, cabinet, gizzard, damn it, now that the country is in such dire straits, you're still caring about the damn Austrians. Fierce, you short-sighted fool. The Austrians are competing with the Prussians for the leadership of Germany. No matter which side wins, it will be a disaster for France. Do you understand? Before the Germans cause disaster, the workers outside will rush in and hang you and me from the street lamps. Finally, at Thiers' insistence, tens of thousands of troops entered Paris to maintain order. The uprising was suppressed, but it also brought the entire French government to a near standstill. At the same time, the bloody week in Lyon begins. Soldiers were ordered to kill anyone who looked like an insurrectionist or sympathized with the insurrectionists in bloody street fighting. Men and women were dragged out of their rooms and shot in the street. The atrocities continued for a week, and the last rebels were shot dead in Coldairy Cathedral. Charles. Death will not be in vain. Here's a hero. A tall bearded man wrapped a young man tightly in a rag. I'm not afraid of death. Let me go back. I will fight them to the end. The young man wanted to break away, but was held tightly by the bearded hands. If you go back, their death will be in vain. We must live well for them. One day General Napoleon will come back to save us. The bearded man shouted. But General Napoleon is dead. The young man had tears in his eyes. General Napoleon also has a nephew, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. And General Jérôme is also alive. But what if they are gone? The young man asked. France needs Napoleon, and there must be a Napoleon. The bearded man replied firmly, yes, there must be a Napoleon. The young man named Charles' eyes flashed with perseverance. At this time, there were many people in ragged clothes like them, but the French army did not kill them all. Among the people in this team, some have regained their strength, while others have lost their souls. The uprising in Lyon, France has failed, and for this reason failure also lost Franz's salary for a year. After all, in the eyes of people at the time, French uprisings always seemed to succeed. At this time, Louis Bonaparte had just become a captain in the Bern artillery regiment, and Jérôme became a prince through the blessing of his father-in-law, and was spending his remaining years in Italy. In 1834, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte was always surrounded by all kinds of conspirators and dangerous elements dissatisfied with the country, and even fanatical admirers and self-righteous liars. A man named Pessigny approached Louis Bonaparte. This Pessigny once joined the French army, but was always a low-level officer. Later he went to Bohemia to work as editor-in-chief, but was quickly replaced. In the end he discovered that only Bonapartism was his path to heaven. Pessigny met Louis Bonaparte under the introduction of the Napoleonic poet Belmont, and the two hit it off. Pessigny advocated that heroes should not care about the current situation, but should create the current situation. These words deeply moved Louis Bonaparte. In fact, Louis Bonaparte never gave up action, which was in perfect agreement with Pessigny's ideas, so the two decided to go to Strasbourg to create a situation. Within the Austrian Empire, several small uprisings were quickly suppressed. Without the French and Prussians, the Austrian dignitaries seemed to have become eggplants beaten by frost. Within the Hungarians, since Prince Esterházy has lost power, they need to elect a new leader, but everyone's strength is about the same, so things become interesting. The Hungarian nobles suddenly fell collectively to Austria's side, and they would all be Austria's loyal servants until a new boss was decided. Thank you to book friend Laxex for your monthly pass, and all book friends for your support. Asking for comments, votes, and all kinds of stuff. In addition, there is a poll in the group today, and there is an airdrop. Chapter 21 Ambrose, Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace. Today, a miscellaneous Grand Duke came here. He was about to become an observer sent by the Austrian army to Brazil. One of the purposes of his trip was to say goodbye to the current patriarch of the Habsburg family. His name was Karl Ambrosius, but as a country nobleman, poverty still limited his imagination. Ever since the first time he entered the palace, he lost his way. But as a member of the Habsburg family, he also has his own pride, and must never bow to others looking around. He quickly attracted the pointing fingers of ladies and maids. Who is this person? You can tell he's a country bumpkin right away. Although he is a country boy, he is quite handsome. Who can keep him and let him see the world? Then a group of women laughed together, but a sharp-eyed maid saw something and reminded them, look, that's the royal coat of arms. Immediately, the women who were teasing just now quieted down and dispersed. Some have given up, but others are more excited. What they didn't know was that Karl Ambrosius's family only had 150 acres of land, not even a carriage, and could not provide the kind of life they wanted. Archduke Karol, the largest landed aristocrat in the Austrian Empire, owned 3 million acres of land. The gap between the two was 20,000 times. Ambrosius finally found someone he could ask for directions to, a young woman approaching with a child under her arm. Those who can do this in this palace must also be members of the royal family. Ambrosius thought, Telia, don't you know how to ride a horse? It's so uncomfortable to hold me like this. Franz complained, my little Grand Duke, I'm just an unlucky tutor and nanny. If I ride a horse in the palace today, you can collect my body tomorrow. You won't get the money you win from me. Failure was Franz was so annoyed that his chest rose and fell. Yesterday, Thalia had been informed that His Majesty the Emperor would meet with Archduke Franz today. Thalia came to Franz's room very early today, and the latter said he wanted to take a nap. Thalia agreed readily when she saw the time, and then she fell asleep in Franz's room. When Thalia woke up, she found that the scheduled time had passed. So they could only march quickly with Franz under their arms. Thalia was in a hurry when a man suddenly appeared from the corner. He knelt on one knee and stretched out his hand to hold Thalia's other hand and said, well done, this beautiful young lady. I think before the man could finish his words, Thalia kicked him in the face. I don't want to. Goodbye, Thalia, someone actually approached you. Franz teased. You damn brat. Thalia choked Franz. I just want to ask for directions. Is it so difficult? The greeting method my father taught me doesn't work. Ambrosius sighed. Finally, a passing guard told Ambrosius that the Hall of Mirrors was not in Schönbrunn Palace. So Ambrosius hurried to the Hall of Mirrors. In the Hall of Mirrors, on the throne, there was an old man and a young man sitting. The old man was Emperor Franz II, and the young man was the child he had just met. Franz also waved to the unlucky guy in front of him. Ambrosius was very excited to see the emperor, and described his excitement. However, Francis II had no interest in listening. However, he was a little surprised when he received the resume from the royal steward. This country bumpkin, who looks slovenly, his face is a little dirty because he was kicked by Thalia and has never seen much of the world, is actually rated so highly in the military academy. What is even more incredible is that the person who made the evaluation was none other than the legendary figure in the Austrian military, Archduke Karol, his younger brother, and one of the most disgusted people in the world. Although Franz II was at odds with his brother Archduke Karol, he knew very well that his brother had a higher eye than his own, and would never praise anyone easily. Being praised by Archduke Karol is enough to prove that the young man in front of him has extremely outstanding abilities. Franz also saw Archduke Karol's comments, and Franz still remembered Archduke Karol's evaluation of his eldest son Albrecht, giving him 2 armies is murder. The implication is that Albrecht can only command an army at most. Historically, Albrecht was a victorious general. In the Battle of Custoza, he led 80,000 Austrian troops to defeat 120,000 troops commanded by King Victor Emmanuel II of Italy. Italian army. Being a military observer seems to be wronging him. Austrian military observers usually mean traveling at public expense. After some thought, Francis II decided to follow the cabinet's advice. Awarded the rank of Major General and sent abroad as an army observer. When Archduke Ambrosius heard the result, he couldn't help but feel sad. But it would have been very good for him without this thin blood relationship. I'm afraid that the rank of general without real power is beyond his reach. Most graduates of military academies start as captains. He no longer knows how far ahead of others he is. Ambrosius also had another purpose for this trip, which was to help him become a matchmaker. His family was very poor and there was no way he could marry a real princess, and his bloodline was inherently impure. If he married another commoner, his descendants might not even have the status of nobles. Even though his family has declined, he and his father still attach great importance to their own bloodline and cannot accept that their descendants will no longer be nobles. Of course, Ambrosius also had confidence. His grades in the military academy were very good, and Archduke Karol also said that he would become a pillar of the Austrian Empire in the future. Ambrosius felt that he was a promising general. Although he had no money now, he had a very good future. In addition, he was also a disciple of Archduke Charles. However, Ambrosius also knew that His Majesty the Emperor was at odds with Archduke Karl, so he did not dare to mention this relationship. He just asked the Patriarch for help as a junior in the family. But Francis II didn't care about Ambrosius. He waved his hand, indicating that he could leave to take up his post. But before taking 2 steps, Ambrosius stopped again and turned back. For the sake of Queen Nissa, for the sake of God, please, Your Majesty, even if it is a disabled or sick princess. Ambrosius's ancestors were descendants of Queen Teresa, so he had the status of member of the royal family. There are indeed some princesses in various countries who are disabled or sick, but even so, their families will ask for a generous gift. And Francis II happened to be a very stingy emperor. Maybe he paid too much war reparations. Ambrosius's actions shocked Franz. He couldn't understand how a good man could suddenly become like this. In fact, Franz underestimated the obsession with status among people at that time. Franz looked at Franz II in confusion and thought, does Austria not only have the system of conferring officials, but also the system of conferring marriages? Franz II had seen this kind of thing so often that he was already used to it. He said slowly, you are still young, and the current financial situation of the Austrian Empire is not good. Nowadays, young people have real talents and learning, and many big families are willing to provide a generous dowry for their daughters. You still need to work hard. In short, just ignore it and find someone who can give you money. Ambrosius's disappointment was palpable. He did not choose to continue to pester him. He chose to leave. Looking at Ambrosius's back, Franz decided to help him. Perhaps it was time to use the traditional skills of the Habsburg family, and a new colonial plan emerged in Franz's mind. This is a transitional chapter, paving the way for the subsequent plot, so stay tuned. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22. A random bit of Mandarin duck music. Ambrosius walked alone in the corridor, and the surrounding scenery did not interest him at all. Suddenly, a figure flashed out from the corner of the corridor. Ambrosius took a closer look and quickly covered his face. Dear young lady, I don't slap people in the face. I don't know where I offended you, and I apologize to you. Ambrosius still has some accomplishments. I'm not here to ask you to apologize, Thalia replied confidently. Who? Ambrosius asked. Thalia ducked out of the way, and Ambrosius saw the little boy he had seen twice. You are Franz. I'm Ambrosius. You should call me uncle. Uncle. Ambrosius, if you really want to find a princess to marry, I have a suggestion. Ambrosius looked at the child in front of him, and then at Thalia beside him. You must be kidding me. This is not a good kid. I'm serious. Franz made a very serious expression. Ambrosius pointed at Thalia. She's a princess. Franz shook his head. Ambrosius breathed a sigh of relief. Thalia's expression was like eating an unripe tomato, and she stared at Ambrosius fiercely. There is a real princess in Southeast Asia who needs you to rescue her. Her country is in the midst of internal and external troubles. She needs a real knight to protect her. After saving her, will she marry me? Then I will use her country as a dowry. After I inherit her country, I will merge it with Austria. Wouldn't this bring glory to the family and contribute to the empire? Have you expanded your territory? Franz felt ashamed. The Grand Duke's brain circuit was a bit strange, but it was better this way, as it would save him brainwashing. Thalia on the side confirmed again that no one in this family has a normal mind. Where is a princess? Ambrosius asked impatiently. Zenla. Franz replied. Oh my god, how do I get there? You can apply to be an army observer and go on the Church's ship. At this time, the Austrian navy had almost never left the Mediterranean, let alone Chenla as far away as Southeast Asia. Moreover, the Austrian navy would not send out warships to escort a no-name Grand Duke. However, the Catholic Church has already penetrated into Chenla. Not only can they transport people safely, but they can also provide first-hand local information. Then, how do I meet that princess? It depends on your own ability. Ambrosius was speechless for a while and took a deep breath. Why don't you know anything? I'm just a kid passing by. Okay, then at least tell me what her name is. Mei. Chenla at this time was a colony of Siam and Vietnam. As King Anzan, the last time he resisted foreign aggression was in 1816. 18 years ago. Both sides built countless fortresses in Chenla with the intention of carving up this land. But as the saying goes, there is no room for two tigers in one mountain. Siam and Vietnam were constantly fighting on the land of Chenla. The two sides fighting were Ram III, the Mingjan in Siam's history, and his opponent was the Ming Emperor of Vietnam. Chenla is now Cambodia, and Siam is now Thailand. However, while Siam and Vietnam were madly invading Chenla, they forgot the importance of people's will. Both sides frantically recruited Chenla people as coolies, and stepped up their plunder in Chenla. As a result, the people of Zenla were in dire straits, and people who longed for peace pinned their hopes on the king, who had not seen him for more than 10 years. Every time the Chenla people revolted, it would be under the banner of saving the royal family. There are more than a dozen rebel armies in Chenla, but rather than saving the royal family, they are more willing to protect their property or become kings of the mountain. King Anzan was controlled by the Vietnamese, while his brother An was controlled by the Siamese. The Chenla government was loyal to Anzan, but the Vietnamese general Truong Minh was the actual ruler of the Chenla government. However, Within the Chandler government, there were also many senior officials who hoped that an N would become king and borrow troops from Siam to expel the Vietnamese. Point of course, some people hoped to welcome Anson back and drive the Siamese out of Chandler Point. The Chandler rebels hoped to kill all officials, as well as Siamese and Vietnamese invaders. Anson's timidity can be described as unbelievable. Emperor Minh Minh of Vietnam once wanted to send Anson back to Chandler and join forces with him to reverse the unfavorable situation against Siam. However, Anson actually refused. The reason was very simple: he was afraid of death. He boasted to Emperor Minh Minh of Vietnam that he could command Chandler's army remotely. Anson found a group of wizards and performed the ritual in the palace, setting the palace on fire. Emperor Minh Minh, Ruan Phuc Chen, killed all the wizards brought by Anson in a fit of rage, and then imprisoned Anson himself on a luxury cruise ship. In a few months, Anson himself would die of illness, and his eldest daughter was assassinated by the Vietnamese. Because of her pro-Siamese tendencies, Anson's second daughter An Mui will inherit the throne. An Mui, who succeeded the throne, did not receive the courtesy that the king deserved. She only stayed in the capital of Chandler as a mascot. When Emperor Minh Minh, Ruan Phuc Chen, felt that everything was under control, he sent people to kill An Mui and her 4 sisters. However, instead of completely eliminating Chandler's resistance, his actions aroused the Chandler people's resistance. In just 1 month, the fire of uprising against the Vietnamese burned throughout Chandler. The king of Siam took the opportunity to send troops to support Anson's brother to become the king of Chandler. In less than half a year, the previous 20 years of efforts of the Vietnamese were in vain, and the Vietnamese were driven out of Chandler. Chandler then became a Siamese colony until the arrival of the French. A month later, St. Stephen's Basilica, bang, bang bang, the ancient door of the church made a heavy banging sound. Several priests shouted impatiently, "Stop knocking, I heard you," since Archbishop Prussia is resident in this church. They have seen many dignitaries in this church, so naturally they are more arrogant and do not look down on ordinary people. And those who come to the church so early are definitely not dignitaries, but most likely those who have made mistakes and come to repent. They had long been tired of hearing the confessions of those sinners and wished they could call the police to arrest those sinners. Now, we are all here to spread the gospel of the Lord. Why do you despise God's people, Archbishop? Prussia did not know when he was standing at the door, and he also put on the sacrificial vestment sewn with gold and silver threads. The archbishop usually stays hungover until noon. Why did he get up so early today? At this time, some priests had already realized that Archbishop Prussia would only wear that sacrificial vestment during major celebrations or when meeting members of the royal family. Now the priests who were so arrogant just now were dumbfounded and lowered their heads to unbolt the church door. Standing outside the door was Ambrosius. At this time, he had put on a clean uniform and had his hair and beard trimmed. In fact, Ambrosius himself is not bad in appearance. However, because he was used to being poor, he had no decent clothes, and he was always unkempt, so he had no aura at all. His behavior can only attract ridicule from others at this time. Ambrosius was neatly dressed, handsome, and of extraordinary bearing. Coupled with his royal status, people naturally felt a sense of respect. Archbishop Prussia is also very satisfied with the young man in front of him. This man will definitely be able to spread the gospel of the Lord, and he can rest assured to leave the battle brotherhood in his hands. Chapter 23, 1834. Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace, Children's Room. Franz is searching for useful materials among the mountains of information. At this time, Austria had 30 kilometers of railways, 6 kilometers of Prussian railways, 150 kilometers of French railways, and 600 miles, approximately 965 kilometers, of British railways. Countries around the world have crazy plans for railways. The French government has launched a 730-kilometer railway construction plan, and by 1848 the total length of French railways will increase to 1,814 kilometers, but it is still too conservative compared to the countries of the German Zollverein Union. The entire alliance, excluding Austria, plans to build 6,000 kilometers of railways. The British also approved a 6,000-mile, approximately 8,047 kilometers, railway construction plan. By 1870, the UK will have 15,357 miles, approximately 24,714 kilometers of railways and build the densest railway network in the world. The Russian Tsarist government had not realized the importance of railways and only approved a few easy to build routes with a total length of about 200 kilometers. Even in 1866, Russia only had a pitiful 1,488 kilometers of railways. The Americans had only a 2,000-kilometer railway construction plan at this time, but in 1850, they would have 9,021 kilometers of railway. Historically, Austria only approved a railway construction plan of about 350 kilometers, and it was not until 1848 that it had 1,200 kilometers of railways. The Austrian government approved Solomon Rothschild's Northern Railway construction plan, and the Northern Railway Company will build 700 kilometers of railways in the next 10 years, but Solomon's dream of a southern railway failed. Not that Francis II disagreed. Francis II was very satisfied with Solomon Rothschild's bribe, but the military and Count Korolov refused to give in on the issue of ownership of the Southern Railway Company. Moreover, Friedrich List, Franz II's special advisor, also supported the views of the military and Count Korolov, and the intelligence provided by the secret police was also very unfavorable to Solomon Rothschild. Finally, Franz II decided to adopt Friedrich List's advice and hand over the Austrian Southern Railway to 3 railway companies. Later, the military requested several new railway lines from Francis II on the grounds of homeland security. Finally, the operating rights of these railway lines were controlled by Count Korolov and Friedrich List, sold to the highest bidder. However, what Count Korolov, latter Minister of War, and Friedrich List did not expect was that 2 important railway lines fell into the hands of the French. At this time, Austria approved a total of 1,400 kilometers of railway construction. The United States accounts for 85% of the world's cotton production, which forced the British to eagerly find new sources of raw materials. Their goals were Egypt and India. The number of steam looms is 1,324 in Austria, 223 in Prussia, 1,511 in France, and 7,000 in the United Kingdom. If water conservancy looms are included, there are 100,000 looms in the United Kingdom. It is worth noting that Saxony is a textile industry in Germany. The industrial center has 450 steam looms. What is gratifying is that Austria's machinery manufacturing industry is not bad. It can independently produce steam looms and export them to other German countries. Saxony is Austria's largest customer, but due to various considerations, the profit Austria can obtain is very small. The Austrian army had 450,000 troops, France 500,000, Prussia 200,000, and Russia 600,000. The Austrian army has the largest number of artillery pieces in continental Europe, with approximately 1,300 artillery pieces, followed by the Russians with approximately 900 artillery pieces, the French with only 800 artillery pieces, the Prussian army with less than 600 artillery pieces, and the British Home Army with only 300 artillery pieces. This has resulted in annual military expenditures accounting for more than half of Austria's fiscal expenditures. However, even so, Austria's investment in military technology and soldier training has gradually failed to keep up with the trend of historical development. In terms of navy, Austria has a large number of naval ships, but it lacks large ships. The actual combat effectiveness is even inferior to that of the Russians, and the French's naval strength is far superior to that of the Russians. It's just that at this time, the navies of all European countries combined were far from being a match for the British. How exaggerated is it? The Austrian navy may not be able to defeat a British squadron. There are more than a dozen squadrons of this size in the UK. Even so, the Austrian navy was still able to win with an overwhelming advantage when facing the navies of non-European countries. The total foreign trade of the Austrian Empire at this time was 300 million florins. France was 1 billion francs, Russia was 400 million rubles, and Prussia was 150 million thalers. It is expected that this number will be 1 year after the Austrian Empire joins the German customs union. Double point however, due to reduced tariffs on some goods and increased administrative costs, the actual impact on fiscal revenue is only about 5%. Of course, with the expansion of trade and improvement of infrastructure, fiscal revenue will grow steadily. Since Austria's own currency system is very confusing, there are even several types of marks. Book Austrian currency exchange formula: 1 gold florin equals 3 gold ducats equals 4.2 silver thalers equals 5 silver florins equals 150 groschen equals 600 pfennig. The commonly used currency is 1 florin equals 12 crus equals 30 groschen equals 120 pfennig equals 0.83 thaler. The large British ships Asnan and Atlantic were under construction. From then on, they would become the pioneers of Britain's conquest of the oceans. Austria has a population of 31 million, but the quality of its citizens is worrying. There are more illiterates than war-torn Spain. The only country that can rival Austria is Russia next door. However, the number of university students in Austria ranks first in Europe, which may of course be related to the large number of universities in Austria. Austria's pig iron production is 100,000 tons, 1/3 that of France, less than 1/10 that of Britain. Slightly lower than Prussia, and not even as good as Belgium. Russian pig iron production is 150,000 tons. Austria's agricultural strength was surprisingly strong, with grain output 4 times that of France and 20 times that of Prussia at this time. Austrian agriculture used chemical fertilizers earlier, while French agriculture was at a low point and suffered from natural disasters. Austria has 2.8 million mules and horses, 11 million cattle, 5 million pigs, and 30 million sheep. In terms of animal husbandry, Austria is comparable to France. Prussia is comparable to France in terms of the number of pigs, cattle, sheep, and poultry. However, the number of mules and horses is seriously insufficient, with the total number being only 1/10 of France. Austria's ordnance mainly relies on private arsenals and imports from foreign countries. Austria's arsenals were mainly located in Bohemia and Lower Austria. Half of the rifles in the entire empire were produced in a small town called Schermanzi. The Austrian military had a virtual monopoly on the ammunition trade in the Austrian Empire. But then a paradox arises. If the price of ammunition is too low, the military will not make money. If the price of ammunition is set too high, the soldiers will not be able to afford the ammunition. The standard pay for the Austrian army is 100 florins per soldier per year. However, due to the financial problems of the Austrian Empire, only half of the standard amount, which is 50 florins, can be issued. During non-war times, the 50 florins saved were used to update equipment and provide supplies. What's more, senior officials of the Austrian army once complained that bullets are more expensive than soldiers. Why can't these soldiers use broadswords and spears as weapons? This will not only solve the problem of idle homeless people on the street, but also solve the problem of military expenditure. Fortunately, the senior official who provided the advice was prevented from retiring early. Successfully saved the lives of a large number of soldiers and ammunition suppliers. The writing may be messy, but this is the most thoughtful one I have written so far. Mainly it's a waste of time looking up information. Chapter 24. After joining the Alliance, Vienna, Lion's Pride Hotel. Unlike the Caesar Hotel, which is filled with aristocratic atmosphere, the layout of the Lion's Pride is very simple, giving people a simple and light feeling, with only a few porcelain as embellishments. Austrians like to decorate their rooms with porcelain to show their wealth and taste. In the past, porcelain was very expensive in Europe, which was definitely the best reflection of financial resources and strength. There are several bands in the hotel taking turns playing for guests, and the lion statue in front of the door is the hotel's signature. In a VIP room, Friedrich List was repeatedly counting his share. 1 million florins, although it was still unredeemable banknotes, still made him ecstatic. This was the first time that he felt the benefits of power, but Count Korolev's words always lingered in his ears, making him unable to sleep or eat well. Metternich was a sanctimonious beast who enjoyed all the benefits of power, but always asked his secret police to investigate the corruption of officials. Once discovered, they did not report it to the emperor, but used it as a blackmail to suck out the bones and marrow. Friedrich List had already seen several officials being arrested and dragged away by the secret police like dead dogs. They came back in rags, and in a daze. Is Metternich now sending someone to keep an eye on him? trying to get some money from him? This made Friedrich List sleepless and uneasy. After all, in Friedrich List's eyes, all the money he had earned with his own hard work could be taken away from him at any time, which made him both frightened and angry. He thought that he would just do what Count Korolaf said and bring down Metternich. This way, they can sit back and relax. In another room, Count Korolaf was drinking with Count Latter. Didn't you say that the situation is still unclear, so don't fall into it? Why did you fall into it first? 1 or 2 million is not enough to build a railway. Count Latter spoke first. What? A joke. Once a gambler, always a gambler. As a gambler, how can you not take a gamble when you see such an opportunity? Korolaf replied with a smile. Then, what is your choice? You have to choose this route that no one wants. The simmering area is full of high mountains, but no one has built a railway in the mountains, let alone a canyon. Count Latter asked. I didn't ask you to invest. Why do you care? No, Trieste is important, but it's too hasty now. How likely do you think I'm to succeed? Count Korolaf asked. 20% at most. Count Latter replied. 20%. That's not bad for a gambler. You must know that there is a commonly used gambling tool in the East called a dice, and it has 6 sides. That is, 6 possibilities. Count Korolaf gestured at the shape of the famous dice. But why can't you wait any longer? At least you need an experienced engineer. Count Tyrrell continued. There must be the first person to eat the wolf peach. Count Korolaf replied calmly. Wolf peach, also known as tomato, was once considered a highly poisonous food. It was discovered in the 16th century, and it was not until the 18th century that a painter who was not afraid of death took a bite and found that it was not as poisonous as the legend said, but instead increased his appetite. At this point, the wolf peach has completed its transformation from an ornamental plant to a food. But what is this for? Count Latter asked in confusion. I am a corrupt criminal. No one in the entire Austrian Empire is more greedy than me, except that old bastard Metternich. I have made profit for myself and my family. Now it is time to make profit for the country. Korolaf the Count said confidently. Very well, come on. I respect you, the corrupt criminal. Count Latter smiled and raised his glass to the Empire. Count Korolaf also raised his glass. On the other side of Vienna, the Caesar Hotel. It's just a bandit. Solomon Rothschild was in extreme anger. He raised an expensive piece of porcelain, raised it high, and put it down gently, picked a cheap plate, and threw it to the ground. There was a crisp sound, and the porcelain plate was smashed to pieces. Several fragments fell onto Metternich's leather shoes, but Prince Metternich ignored the fragments. Solomon, as I said, His Majesty will not allow anyone to take away his basket. Metternich said. Damn it. Where's my money? He's not an emperor. He's just a bandit and a scoundrel. Did my 1500 gold bars just go down the drain? Solomon Rothschild roared. Solomon, you should know that he is the emperor. So what? I'm Solomon Rothschild. Solomon roared angrily. Solomon, for the sake of our many years of friendship, let me remind you that this country belongs to His Majesty, and you and I are both his subjects. Metternich's tone was cold. Like cold water poured over his head. Solomon immediately sobered up. Then he broke out in a cold sweat. He had dominated the financial world of the Austrian Empire for many years. All bankers in Austria followed his lead. Whether they were the emperor or ministers, or major national projects, they could not do without his support. However, since the Austrian Empire joined the German Zollverein, North German bankers have poured into Austria like crazy. Solomon Rothschild could ask his brothers in Frankfurt not to lend money to the Austrian Empire, but there was no way to stop the profit-seeking North German financiers with the capital injection from North Germany. Austria's debt problem has been greatly alleviated. Moreover, mainstream bankers are unanimously optimistic about the future of Austria joining the German Zollverein, and have jumped on this big ship full of holes. The Austrian Empire has begun to solve the debt problem, and one of the ways to solve the debt problem is to solve the creditors just like King Philip IV of France did to the Knights Templar, once and for all. Moreover, it was rumored that Emperor Franz II used a sword to force Prince Esterhazy to submit in the palace, thereby occupying his family property. Arresting a Jewish banker seemed like nothing if he could commit such crazy behavior. As for the charges, they are not even needed against Prince Esterhazy, let alone him. A Jew. At this time, the reputation of the Jews was very bad, and cases of persecution of Jews were not uncommon in European countries, not to mention Russia. Austria also had many expulsions of Jews in its history. It's just that Francis II was notoriously weak, so people forgot his existence. Thinking of this, Solomon Rothschild made an action that he had never done in his life. He bent down and took out a handkerchief to clean Prince Metternich's leather shoes. "Your Excellency, forgive me for being reckless. His Majesty the Emperor, just use the money. If you need it, you can pay it back at any time. I won't charge any interest. Please consider our friendship over the years." Solomon said, very seriously sincere. "I have good news to tell you. His Majesty has specially approved a route from Prague to Bavaria for you. Now, any route that can involve the German customs union is a good route, and Solomon naturally knows this. He said quickly, "Thank you, Your Majesty, and God bless our Emperor Franz II. I have one more thing to do." "What's up, Your Majesty?" said. "Settle the balance." Chapter 25. The Troubles of Francis II. Schönbrunn Palace, Banquet Hall. Today is the day of the royal dinner. Francis II is sitting at the main seat. The past year has given him a feeling of spring breeze. The whole country is prospering, and even more people are bribing him. Just seeing the eldest son Ferdinand, who had to leave the game due to a sudden epilepsy and foaming at the mouth, he couldn't help but frown. Such an emperor seems unable to rule well, and it seems that imperial power is about to enter a period of decline. Then he looked at the second son, who was acting drunkenly, and frowned. Even more. Archduke Franz Karl did not yell when he was drunk. On the contrary, he was crying alone on the plate. His gaffe made Mrs. Sophie very angry, but she could not get angry in front of Franz II, and could only shake her husband's body gently. Archduke Franz Karl seemed to feel very comfortable. Instead of getting up, he made an embarrassing sound. "Take him out. Archduke Franz Karl is drunk." Franz II waved his hand impatiently, signaling the attendants to hurry up. Franz Karl's attendant immediately acted and carried the Archduke out together with the attendant's Mrs. Sophie stood up and wanted to apologize for her husband's rudeness, but Franz II just waved his hand and asked her to leave too. "Grandpa, I'm full." Franz also found an opportunity to run away. At this time, the rules of a French meal were very troublesome. There were many dishes, they were served slowly, and they had to listen to the explanations from the chef next to them. The fat chef with spitting water really turned off Franz. Moreover, French meals are not to Franz's taste. Only rice is familiar to Franz. Rice is served as a vegetable in French meals. He didn't know how cooked the steak was, and Franz couldn't bite it at all. In the end, he had to cut it into small pieces with a knife and swallowed it. He almost choked, grabbed the cup next to him, and took a swig, only to find that it was red wine. Franz now felt dizzy. Franz II wanted to keep his grandson, the only person in the family who could make him comfortable. It's just that he is very face conscious, so he has no choice but to condone his grandson's rudeness. The family members all left, and Franz II sat on the throne feeling lost. Sanborn, the royal butler on the side, leaned into Francis II's ear and said, "Prince Metternich has sent the balance of 1,000 gold bars to the palace. I counted the number, and it was correct, but Prince Metternich said that the Bavarians want us to build a railway from Prague to Bayreuth." Bayreuth was the economic center of Bavaria at this time, but it was difficult to build a railway on the hilly land between the Fichtel Mountains and the Frank-Jura Mountains, and the cost would naturally increase a lot. Nowadays, when mentioning Bavaria, everyone always thinks of BMW, football, beer, pork knuckle, developed economy and beautiful scenery. However, Bavaria at this time was notoriously a bad place in Germany. It was obviously an agricultural country, but it was importing food like crazy, and could not even be self-sufficient. At the same time, it is a desert of knowledge and industry, with very few factories and universities. The people at the bottom lived in poverty, but the people at the top were dissolute and extravagant, and two artist kings emerged one after another. The current king, Ludwig I, was a philanderer. The 36 beauties in the beauty gallery in Nymphenburg Palace witnessed this history. The scandal with his mistress Laura Montz even caused him to lose the throne. The Bavarian government hopes that Austria will build another railway to Bayreuth, firstly to promote trade and increase tax revenue, and secondly to allow Bavarians to work in Austria, to increase Bavaria's wealth. For Bavarians, Austria is the first choice to find a job abroad. After all, Austria is big enough and has enough opportunities, and everyone in Bavaria speaks German, but speaking German in Austria is a huge advantage. Especially those young people who aspire to be officials can earn several times more salary for the same official position, and their German identity and German language are advantages that other ethnic groups in Austria do not have. There are also religious factors. There are many opportunities in North Germany, but the religious beliefs are different from those in South Germany. The shadow of the 30 Years' War always hangs over Germany. They don't want to get up one day and be burned on the stake. In fact, not only Bavaria, but the entire South German region has become much closer to Austria since learning about Austria's joining the German customs union. However, the Bavarians' proposal to build another railway to Bavaria made Francis II very angry. No one was optimistic about the trade between Austria and Bavaria, and the railway to Bavaria was built entirely for the purpose of doing business with the North German countries. In the eyes of Francis II, building another railway to Bavaria was a complete waste. From Prague to Bayreuth, with rivers and mountains in between, the total length is nearly 250 kilometers. At this time, the railway cost per kilometer was 60,000 to 70,000 florins. That is, this railway will cost more than 10 million florins. But Francis II had another thought. Anyway, I'm not the one who paid for it. If you want to fix it, just let those Jews fix it. So, tell Sanborn, tell Metternich to let Solomon Rothschild build them. Doesn't he like building railways? Let him build them as much as he can. Sanborn turned around and left knowingly. Franz II looked at his schedule. He would go to meet his relatives in Italy tomorrow. The craze for railroad building soon spread to Austria's back garden, central Italy. In addition to the Papal States, the four principalities of Tuscany, Parma, Lucca, and Modena all hope to strengthen trade with Austria. The Italian countries that started out as commerce and trade inevitably went into decline during this period of decline in Mediterranean trade. At this time, the countries of central Italy had long lost their former glory. The people were living in poverty, their handicrafts were backward, and they lacked domestic resources. They were unable to compete with the industries of the surrounding powerful countries. Countries in China, Italy, and Italy are all facing serious fiscal deficits and constant popular uprisings. If Austria hadn't often sent troops to help suppress it, these small states would have been doomed long ago. These small states hoped to build railways to strengthen trade with Austria, but domestic businessmen were unwilling to pay the money. After all, if you are rich in the mountains, you have distant relatives, and if you are poor in the city, no one cares about you. Really powerful investors are not willing to waste money on these small countries that have become a thing of the past. They are not willing to pay for it themselves. After all, they just want to collect more taxes. As for the so-called credit, they have long been used to buy luxury goods. Now we can only place our hope on the Austrian emperor. After all, Francis II himself said my Italian countries. This sentence, and after the Congress of Vienna, it was also determined that Italy was Austria's sphere of influence. However, at this time, Francis II was having a headache because he had no money. After all, the decline of China and Italy had become a fact. Continue to invest or maintain the status quo? That is the question. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.